I would like to call to order the September meeting of our Transportation Committee. Before we start, in view of the day today, I would like us all to have a moment of silence to honor the people that died on September 11th, 2001. Okay, so let's have the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would now like to introduce our new members of the Transportation Committee. So if you would, Michael Lempres.
Michael Lempres. Yes.
Michael Lempres. Mary Widmer. Kevin Reynolds. Kevin, nice to see you. So that's very good. We're really happy to have new blood here, and I know you're all good workers, and you'll all do a great job. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes of the May 8th meeting.
Make a motion to approve.
Okay. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any committee reports? Okay. Public comments, correspondence, open discussion items not on the agenda. Presentations? No presentations. We'll then now go to the agenda items. Number one is the Brown Act and compliance and training. And I think we have Bill Connors here who is going to give us a lecture on that.
Actually, Kathy asked me to be brief, so I took out all the jokes.
Oh, gee, the fun part.
What I'd like to do tonight is kind of go over a lot of the high points. I know we have some new members. We also have some old members, and it's never a bad idea to run through these kinds of things. And it's also important that your staff be aware of these rules and regulations, some of which carry some hefty criminal penalties with them for failure to play by the rules. So it's always a good idea to at least have them thrown out there every once in a while, so we make sure we're all playing within the boundaries. First of all, some of the basics. Eligibility, you have to be a registered voter. So if you're not, I would suggest you register really fast. Secondly, we do have a term here, so it's a 4-year term, and there are 2 terms maximum, 2 full terms maximum. So, and everybody serves at the pleasure of the City Council except the council members. That would be redundant. Now, all of you get a title with this job. You serve on the Traffic Safety Committee, so you're committee members on the Traffic Safety Committee. And
Transportation.
Excuse me, the Transportation. Yeah, it's another committee, sorry. And just so you know, you cannot use your title for non-town business. That's actually against the law. You can't use the title or town resources in the conduct of political activity. Again, that's a Political Reform Act requirement. And you can't use your official position to influence other government decisions. So you can't go to the Planning Commission or the City Council and introduce yourself as Transportation Committee member so-and-so. Well, why would you say that? The only reason you'd ever say that is it carries some kind of special weight with it. And it can't, because that would be a violation, again, of the Political Reform Act, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Expressions of opinion. This is a strange thing to say, but you give up some of your First Amendment rights when you serve on a board or commission of a town. For instance, you cannot appear before another board or the City Council and say that you are, Transportation Commission member so-and-so, unless you are asked by this committee to go to that board and speak on their behalf. Because otherwise it sounds like you're an official representative of that body, and you have to be before you can make it look like you are. You cannot promise to bind the town. This body is advisory only. You never take final action on anything. I know that sounds odd, but your purpose, as set forth in the resolution of the town, is to be serving an advisory role to the city council. So because of that, you cannot contract or bind the town. There is an exception to that. That's the Planning Commission, but that's another day. So the title of this talks about the Brown Act. And here's where I drop my first joke. So the Brown Act. This is California's so-called Sunshine Act. And we do all of our public business in the public's eye. And that's what the Brown Act is all about. It seems real simple, but it actually gets pretty complicated. So tonight, everybody's sitting here. We all said our Pledge of Allegiance. We have our agendas and everything else. So this is clearly a meeting of this body, right? Well, what happens if, when the meeting's over, 3 of you walk outside on the street corner and start talking about transportation business? Well, 3 of you is okay. But if you get to 4, that's a quorum of this body. And it doesn't matter where you are or when you're there. If you're talking about subject matter jurisdiction, that's a quorum, and that is a meeting. And in order to have a meeting, you have to comply with the Brown Act, because the public has a right to know what you said, what you were saying, and what was going on at that meeting. No more smoky-filled back rooms like in the old movies. So everything takes place out in the public eye. Anytime there's a quorum that gets together to hear, discuss, or deliberate, you can constitute a meeting. Well, does that mean you have to all be in the same place at the same time? Absolutely not. There's something called a serial meeting or a seriatim meeting. And in that case, anytime a quorum of you actually gets together either telephonically or even through emails, electronically, in any way, shape, or form, if you start communicating about something within your jurisdiction, it can violate the Brown Act. Now, how does that start? Well, person number 1 talks to person number 2. And so far we're okay, right? That's less than a quorum. And person number 2 talks to person number 3. And now we're getting dangerously close, or perilously close, to a violation. And if anybody in the first 3 talks to anybody else, guess what? Everybody that has spoken to anybody is now in violation of the Brown Act. And everybody says, well, why do I care? Because if you knowingly do it, it's a misdemeanor. If you unintentionally do it, you can still be fined. And therefore, therein is the rub. So you want to make it really sure, or make it very certain that if no more than 1 or 2 of you speak among yourselves, because anything more than that has the potential to end up a Brown Act violation, even though you don't know about it. And by the way, number 1, he's sitting there going, wait a minute, all I did was talk to 1 other guy. What did I do wrong? Well, when you count to 7 and you talk to 1 other guy, if he or she then talks to 2 other people, guess what? You now have a quorum. You violated the Brown Act because it wasn't a notice meeting. So these are kind of nuances that you have to think about. Having said that, not all gatherings of a quorum constitutes a meeting. There are some exceptions. Conferences, a community meeting, if no discussion of your subject matter occurs, unless it is something, a public meeting, for instance, where you're invited to speak and you all can go and speak individually and the public is allowed to attend. In those cases, not a violation, it's not a meeting. There's one other important exception, and that's the so-called social or ceremonial function. So if all of you, Kathy McKeithen's going to retire soon. If all of you came to the city council meeting and we're sitting here together, well, that's a quorum, right? Even in the council chambers. But it's not a quorum. It's not a meeting because it's a ceremonial function, and it's not something that violates the act then. Okay, so what happens for every one of your meetings? You'll notice in front of you have an agenda. And you have an agenda, this is a regular meeting. And certain things happen with that agenda. A regular agenda talks about it's the normal date and time for the meeting, and it sets forth the items that are to be discussed tonight, and it also allows the public to stand before you and talk about anything that's within your subject matter jurisdiction. So any transportation issue, anybody, and they don't have to be an Atherton resident, they do have to be a person, could stand before you and say, I'd like to talk to you about this issue. Now, you can time them. You can limit them to 3 minutes. That's been held by the courts to be okay. You might be able to go less, but I would say you're breaking new ground. You could certainly say 5 minutes if you were, really wanted to hear what somebody had to say. And it's important, I think, that you kind of deal with an even hand. So you can't say 3 minutes for people that say something I like, and 5 minutes for the other way around. 3 minutes for those that say something I don't like, and 5 minutes for everybody that says something that supports me. Note that the other kind of meeting is a special meeting, and that's one that's not at the regular place or time. And when those occur, there has to be special notice provisions that you don't really care about, because the staff are going to take care of those notice issues. But what's important to know is that a special meeting, you can only deal with those items that are on the agenda. Can't add anything, can't deal with anything new. Now, there's exceptions. You can take administrative action. For instance, at a special meeting, you can say, well, we'd like to continue this to another meeting. Or, is everybody available to go to attend a special meeting in the future? So you can take care of administrative matters, but you can't talk about anything of importance. So you can't talk about any transportation issues if they're not on the agenda. Now, there are ways to get around that on a regular agenda, but not on a special agenda. All meetings must be posted ahead of time unless adjourned from a prior meeting. So if you were to notice, right outside the door here and across the hall, across the way in City Hall, there will be a notice of this meeting that's posted. There's other things that sometimes occur. Sometimes they're in the newspaper and things like that. But if we forget that one, it doesn't matter as long as they're posted. That's all that's legally required. There is no requirement that anybody appearing before you give your name and address. Now, it's helpful to staff for us to know who this person is, because they might say something that's actually cogent. And we write it down, and we'd like to get back to them. Now, in that case, it is helpful, obviously, if they come up here and say, I'm not going to tell you who I am, but here's what I want to say, let them talk. But in the end, it doesn't matter what they say, we're not going to get back to them unless we know who they are. So it's really nice when people, remember these meetings are recorded, so it's really nice when people appear, if they give their name, so that we can then use that for our, if we have to make minutes and say, Mr. Johnson got up and talked. So it's nice to ask, but just please remember they don't have to tell you. It's okay for anybody to attend. They don't have to be Atherton residents. They don't have to be voters. They do have to be respectful and play by our rules. They cannot disrupt the meeting. In fact, it's a crime to disrupt the meeting. They can also bring their tape recorder or their video recorder, as long as it's not something that audibly impacts the meeting. The other one that's sometimes hard for people to understand is that you cannot prevent the public from criticizing yourselves, the staff, or the public. Now, you can explain to them that we don't allow personal criticisms, but they can in general say, I disagree with the last speaker. I disagree with your concept of putting a stop sign someplace. They can even be somewhat vitriolic and rude and get away with it as long as it's within the bounds of simply expressing their opinion. For instance, they can say, Mayor Dobby, or former Mayor Dobby, when he was the mayor, was the worst mayor we've ever seen, and as far as transportation issues, and here's why. And they're entitled to their opinion. And we all get to grow thick skin, and sometimes incredibly thick skin, and there's not much we can do about it, because that's just, again, you give up a lot of free speech rights when you're on one of these committees. It's okay to limit time. As I said before, 3 minutes is as low as I think you ought to go. And we talked about public comments. Oh, if somebody gets up and makes a public comment, it's okay for the chair to make a brief comment. Or if somebody else is an expert, for instance, he might refer to the chief and say, can you respond to that comment briefly? Now, triple underline the word briefly. Because you can't discuss it, you can't deliberate. So what's the difference between discussing and making a brief comment? Well, the Brown Act says you can make a brief comment to somebody who has made a comment before you, regardless of whether or not it's on the agenda. You can say, well, that's something we're going to talk about in the future, or there's a reason we did that, and that's because of X. But brevity is a highlight, and those of you that come to council meetings, every once in a while, I'll start hemming and hawing and looking at the mayor, going, this is way past brief. And so, and again, as I said, remember the penalty for violating the Brown Act can be a criminal penalty if you knowingly violate it.
Could I just ask you on that last item there, as far as replying to any comment, does that apply to city council members as well, the brevity part?
I think there's an exemption for city attorneys, but I'm not sure about council members. It's a matter. It's really how the council proceeds is a matter of how the mayor wants to treat everybody.
As far as the Brown Act goes, if a public comment is made, and you've told everybody that the staff can only make a brief comment on it, does that apply to the council?
It does. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
What about vitriolic remarks? Do we have that opportunity?
Well, I can't say I've never heard vitriolic comments from a city council, but we do have some rules that talk about, civility and being nice to each other.
Not to each other, to the public.
Oh yeah, even there. Remember, everything you needed to learn, you learned in kindergarten, and one of them is play well on the playground, and that's kind of what we try to.
So long as it's not personal, can we do it?
Well.
I'd like a free-for-all in the last couple months.
It's been there before, and we all know the rules. And the council has rules, and the council says you cannot have a free-for-all, and it's up to the mayor or the chair of this committee to blow the whistle. Yes, sir.
But it is okay to ask questions of the speaker if you don't understand what they're saying.
Yeah, sure. And again, it's pretty easy to say, I don't get what you're saying. Could you clarify? And as long as that person can do that in 3 minutes or less. Unless the chair wants to give them more time, and there's another thing. It's somewhat problematic to give somebody more time. I know it seems like such a nice thing to do and a polite thing to do. The problem is, if you give the first person 5 minutes and you look at a full room, guess what? Everybody gets 5 minutes because we play with an even deck and everybody gets a fair hand here. So when we don't play favorites, we don't pick anybody out. One gets 5, all gets 5. Now, there are some rare exceptions to that, but that's probably not going to be an issue. The area where you're going to find the most issues with this commission, I believe, or any committee, excuse me, are the conflicts of interest, because sometimes they're just not intuitive. So there's really two kinds, or maybe three kinds. The most important ones are so-called Political Reform Act of 1974 conflicts of interest. And that's because there's a commission sitting up in Sacramento called the Fair Political Practices Commission, the FPPC. And they seem to exist outside the bounds of normal budget constraints because they keep hiring more and more investigators, field investigators, to go out and look for violations of the Political Reform Act. And why? Because they're now very commonly fining administrative fines of $2,500 or more. So it's kind of like they're paying for themselves by dispensing pain amongst those who might violate the conflict rules. So let me go through the conflict rules pretty simply. And for this body, I think you're going to find them absolutely easy to live with. There's actually two parts. The first is disclosure of financial interests and assets. The second is disqualification if there's a financial conflict in the decision in front of you. The first part is easy, disclosure. All of you were probably given by the city manager / city clerk a document called the Form 700.
Yep.
Not yet?
No, they're not
They don't have to fill one out? We don't have them filling out Form 700s? Well, then I can skip this whole part. That makes it easy. Now, the other part, financial interest in the decision. There's an 8-part test. I'm going to whiz through it, don't take notes. If you are a public official, 1, involved in making a government decision, where the official may have an economic interest, 3, directly or indirectly, 4, in a material way, 5, that may have a foreseeable impact on your economic interest, 6, with no public generally exception, 7, or legal requirement to participate, 8, then you are disqualified and you cannot participate in any way. You have to announce that, get up, and leave the room. Okay? Now, you got that first 8-part test down, right? Okay, and no you don't. But I'm actually kind of proud of that 8-part test because it was developed by the city attorney's office in Monterey and stolen by the FPPC. And yes, I wrote it. Now, what does it really mean? Since there are no businesses in the town of Atherton, it pretty much really boils down to, is the project you're talking about within 500 feet of your residence or any property that you own? For instance, if you're talking about a traffic signal within 500 feet of your home, and you literally go and on a map, you measure 500 feet from each corner, so you get if it's close, and you find out if you're within 500 feet of the project. Why? Because theoretically, anything within that 500 feet that goes in either increases or decreases the value of your own property to some extent. And it doesn't matter if it's a penny. If it changes the value, if it makes it go up or down, then you have a disqualifying event if it's material and you go through the rest of the test. Now, why did I skip most of the other ones? Because unless you found that you were dealing with some kind of a business, for instance, you might be talking about installing some kind of unique patented portable speed hump, and you want to know if it's a good idea. Well, if you own stock in the company that makes it, guess what? You probably have a conflict of interest, because if you recommended that we buy, 1 or 2 of these, and I think they're like 80 grand, so if you wanted to recommend that we buy one, that could impact your stock value, or if even worse, if it's a small company, it can impact that too. But for the most part, your staff will know that, and you can always check with staff. You will know if you have a conflict, but most of the time it's going to be the 500-foot issue. Also, if you received a gift or income from an applicant that comes in front of you within the past 12 months, you probably have a disqualification. You have at least raised the interest, and you need to start talking to staff. Now, who can you talk to? Well, you can talk to the chief, you can talk to Mike, you can talk to the boss, whatever level she's at that day, or you can call me. And we were more than happy to work through this whole test, because there's no sense training you on the test, because quite frankly it's so complicated and it gets so complex dealing with New York Stock Exchange rules, and you have more than 10,000 shares. Are they fairly traded on the open market? You don't need to deal with all that. All you need to do is think of, is there any way this could impact me monetarily, this decision? And if there is, you need to contact one of us. And by the way, it's only for things within your jurisdiction. So if it had to do with if there was a project that was going to go across or was going to be, the town was talking about improving something just on the Menlo Park side of the street, which has happened in the past where we've talked about doing something like that, then you don't have a conflict even if you're right across the street, because it makes no sense, but it's only for things that happen within your own jurisdiction. They used to cross jurisdictional lines, but it got so complicated, the FPPC finally just made it simple. 500 feet in your own jurisdiction. Now,
Bill.
Yes, sir. Ma'am.
Isn't there an exception for issues that affect a certain broad swath of people? Like high-speed rail.
Yeah, I'll get to the exceptions, but I haven't got to the exceptions yet. The last two parts of the test were that it not fall within the public generally exception, which Kathy just talked about, and the other one is a legal requirement to participate. Now, public generally. Easiest example is, what if you were looking at something citywide? The stop signs are too small, and you want to go to bigger stop signs, and you want to do it everywhere in the town. Almost all of you are going to find you're within 500 feet of a stop sign. Not everybody, but most people are going to be within 500 feet of a stop sign in any direction. Now, if that happens, then you would think, oh my goodness, we're all going to be disqualified. It doesn't work that way, because if the impact on you is pretty much the same as the impact on everybody else, or a substantial portion of the rest of the community, then that's called the public generally exception. And yeah, everybody gets a free pass on that one. You get to participate regardless of how close to it you are. The other one is whether or not there is a legal requirement to participate. Well, for instance, you have a quorum here of 7 people. And what would happen if a different example were to come about? It's lots easier, by the way, using planning commissions. But if there were some issue that were coming before you that had to do with maybe cutting off or restricting traffic on 4 streets, and it just turns out that the 4 streets would wipe out 4 of you. So the 4 of you can't participate anymore. And that means that you don't have a quorum. But if it's not like somebody's absent because of a vacation or something. It doesn't matter how many times they call the meeting, unless somebody's willing to move, you have a potential quorum, for a lack of a quorum forever. And in that case, you can use a random method to bring back one of the disqualified people. And once you bring them back, they participate fully. They can talk about it. Despite the fact that they have a conflict, they participate as if they did not. Everybody else is still booted out of the room, can't play, but that one person, or in my example, one person, but it might be, I've actually seen planning commissions get down to where they only had 2 people left to vote, and so they had to bring back a couple of people randomly, drawing straws, random numbers, whatever. Anything that's random works, but it does happen rarely. What happens if you do have a financial conflict, and you're a material financial conflict, and you're in fact disqualified? Well, as I said earlier, you have to disclose it on the record generally. So, if the matter's called, you turn to the chair and say, Mr. Chair, I need to report that I have a potential financial conflict because my house is within 500 feet of this project. Thank you very much. Get up, leave the room. Somebody will come get you, hopefully, when the next item is called. You can't sit in the audience and make faces at your colleagues. You cannot send a letter in. You cannot have your wife send a letter in on your behalf, but your wife can send a letter in on her own behalf, or husband, spouse. So it's not about if you're disqualified, is your spouse disqualified? That's not the case. But if you're disqualified, you cannot use an intermediary to represent you. So you can't send in someone to appear on your behalf. Now, the question's going to come up. Someone's going to say, well, can I send my lawyer? Well, there's a split of opinion on that. The lawyer could theoretically come. I think an easier case is made because there's an FPPC decision that says your spouse can send something on his or her own behalf. Now, you can't technically influence them or tell them what to write. I'm not coming into your house. I'm not going to make you testify or raise your hand. I'm just telling you, you can't use anyone else to do your bidding. Now, having said that, we've recently had this come up at the Planning Commission level, and somebody's wife actually wanted to, on her own, submit a letter, and was allowed to do so because the FPPC has ruled on that one. Okay, so And by the way, I've always liked to say, I don't know why, but everybody perceives disqualification as if it's, like being called a redneck or something. It's not a bad thing. Disqualification just means that you live too close to something, or you might have a financial, the decision might impact you financially. And I've always looked at people and as they fight so hard to retain their vote. And I've said, look, is your one vote worth your good name? Because that's really what you're talking about. Are you honest enough to play by the rules? And my attitude is really simple. If it's pretty close and it looks like you have a conflict, then what's the deal? You got 6 other people in this case to make a recommendation to 5 other people. It's not worth it if it's close. Declare a conflict and just sit that one out. It is complicated at times, and I do suggest that you seek help if you have any questions or issues. It gets a little bit more confusing when you talk about something out there called the common law conflict of interest. And that's basically a duty to avoid even the perception of financial impropriety. What do I mean? Well, the Political Reform Act says if your spouse or your kids have a financial interest in a project, you have a problem and you have to disqualify. But what about Uncle Bob? Nope. What about your best friend? Nope. You can sit in judgment on your best friend's project. Now, I got to tell you, if you want to keep that best friend, I know how you're going to vote. You're going to support their project. But that is a problem. And therefore, under the common law concept of common law, you're still required to avoid the appearance. I like to use the newspaper test. If you were going to read about this recommendation tomorrow morning's almanac, powerful as it might be, is it going to embarrass you? Would it be something that you went, oh God, I really don't want to, I wish I hadn't done that, or I'd looked at it. If it's going to be embarrassing, then don't do it. Disqualify yourself, and technically, common law, you don't have to leave the room, but my recommendation is, why not? Because for all those other reasons, it's not worth doing. You may hear a lot of stuff about mandatory ethics training, AB 1234. It doesn't apply in Atherton, but it's not a bad idea, and we probably will look at doing it. It doesn't apply in Atherton because none of you get paid. And it only applies where boards and commissions and committees get paid. But it's still, most city attorneys think it's a good idea. There's another conflict that's much more serious, and this one is a big deal. In fact, it's among city attorneys called the death penalty. And that's called Government Code Section 1090. And that says that because you're now a member of an official body, you cannot have a financial interest in any contracts made by you or any board or body in which you're a member. Now, this body doesn't enter into contracts, right? That's true. You've never entered into a contract. But see, you recommend to the city council that they do recommend, they do enter into contracts. You might recommend that they put striping in at a certain location. You might recommend that they buy a certain kind of warning light across a traffic signal. And if you would then try to enter into a contract with the town, it would be a felony, subject to prison, a $1,000 fine, which of course doesn't fit the crime. But most importantly, the contract is automatically void, and any money you've been paid you have to return, but the town would get to keep anything that they contracted with you to buy. And so the worst case was a guy was on a city council, and the town needed a piece of property for some kind of a water detention pond or something. And he said, well, he's a city council member. He says, I'll just sell it to the city, and I'll sell it to you at the appraised value of the cost. And there was apparently nothing else around that would really work. And he did. And after the court hearing, the town got to keep the property, and he had to give the money back. He wasn't prosecuted criminally because it was good faith, but it's a very, very, very serious penalty, and there's no legal leeway for it. Doesn't matter if you had good faith, bad faith. The contract's going to be void, and you're going to be in trouble. And it does happen. Okay, some general information. A quorum, half plus 1, so a half would be 4. 3 plus 3.5. So anyway, you only need 4 to make a quorum, right? But what happens if somebody quits and now you're down to 6 people? The quorum is still 4 because it's 3 plus 1. So it's always going to be the quorum counts of those that are appointed, not those that could be appointed. We have some commissions and committees that have like the potential for 10 members or something very large, but they've only got 3 or 4 or 5. And so they can have a smaller number, and the quorum is just basically half of those appointed. Talked about by the way, if you're disqualified, remember, under the Fair Political Practices Commission's venues, it doesn't count towards a quorum. So even if you started the meeting with a quorum and 2 people then, or 3 people were disqualified and it took you below, then you don't count for quorum purposes. Public hearings, you're not going to have any, so it doesn't really matter. The decisions out of this committee are advisory to the council only. You never take final action. You cannot spend any money. You cannot direct staff, send press reports to the media. You can't do anything except advise the city council on what you think they should do. And that you can do freely. You can do it on your own, or you can do it if they send something to you and ask for your opinion. Now, harkening back a little bit, remember I said the public has a right to provide input on every item, and that's either before or during the discussion of the matter. And that could happen here, where somebody comes in and says, well, I've got to leave, so I want to make my comments on an item that's on the agenda. Can I make it now and then leave? We don't have to let them at all, unless it's a special meeting, and then it's any item that's either that's on the agenda. So in a regular meeting, you don't have to allow it, but it doesn't really hurt to do so. And why do I care about letting people talk? Well, because every matter should be decided based on information in the record, and only that information that's in the record. So, what does that mean? What is the record? You have a whole bunch of information in front of you that was provided by staff ahead of the meeting, right? It's in your packet of information. Well, that constitutes part of the record. The other thing that constitutes the record is when people come up here and testify to you. And they might come up and say, oh, here, I want to give you something. And they give you something at the meeting. Now, that is truly a royal pain, because now nobody in the public has seen that information ahead of the meeting. And yet they have a right to see it ahead of the meeting if, in fact, staff has given it to you. They have a right to see that information. So it kind of makes it tough, because I've seen people walk up with documents 2 inches thick and hand it and say, here. And you know why they do that at the meeting? Because they know you can't read it at the meeting. I've actually seen councils take a break of a half hour, say, council members, go read it. Because it can be important. Because if you physically couldn't have read it, unlike Congress that appears to, we don't play the you have to pass it to know what's in it rule. You're not supposed to vote on something unless you have in the record and know what's in the record, although it sometimes plays a little loose. But even though this is advisory and it's not final action, why would we care about it? Well, because when you send up something to the city council very often, part of their record is your recommendation. But what did you base your recommendation on? Is it because you've lived here for a long time and you know the traffic patterns and you went, oh, well, yeah, I know, but you didn't say that into the record. By the way, you can input into the record. You can look at this. John could say, look, you know what? I drive that intersection every day and I can tell you it's terrible. And here's what I have witnessed myself. As long as he says that and it's in the record and the public could comment on that, then it's okay. But if at the very end you've closed the hearing and John says, well, I'm going to make a motion to vote no on this. And the reason I'm going to make that motion is because even though I didn't say anything and there's nothing in the record, I just know that that's a really bad idea and this is a bad thing.
Bill, could I ask you how long you think you're going to continue?
About 2 more minutes,
Okay.
maybe 3. So it's very important that the record be something that is either recorded or put into this in writing. And actually, nothing else should be considered before making a decision. Finally, I literally am on the last paragraph. We recognize that your service to the community is voluntary. But even so, you need to know that some of these legal requirements carry stiff penalties. Fines, administrative fines, criminal penalties. And it's important that, therefore, you understand what these requirements are all about. If you're in doubt, contact your committee representative, city clerk, and myself, the city manager. Our job is to make sure that you do your job freely, without apprehension, and our job is really here to assist you when needed. So with that, do you have any questions?
Well, thank you, Bill. Does anybody have any questions for Bill?
I do. You were starting to say something. You were starting to say, if John didn't say it prior to his saying, well, despite the
Right.
fact I didn't say it.
If he just brought it up under deliberations and it's not in the record, doesn't count. He can't rely on it. And if you think about it, the way we do business in the public is not only do you do your business in the public's eye, but the public has a right to comment on the issues. And how can they comment on something if John kept it a secret until the very end and sprung it and said, "Oh, this isn't in the record, but I'm going to vote no on this for this reason." And by the way, it gets technical, but I think it's always better to make your reasons known when you take a vote. You don't have to. You don't have to have everybody's input. It can be a motion, a second, and a vote. But it sometimes is helpful for an advisory vote that the city council know what you were thinking. So that's helpful. Anything else? Did I answer that?
Any other questions for Bill? Well, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Bill. We'll see you back here in a year from now on this item. Next item on the agenda is the Valparaiso Safe Routes to School Plan. Mike Gashawagi.
Yes, we have actually representatives here from Menlo Park and their consultant, Kimley Horn. And what they're going to be doing is be sharing with you their draft plan, Safe Routes to School. Most of the project they're going to be describing is actually within the city of Menlo Park. However, there are parts along Valparaiso that are actually within the town of Atherton. So, again, the purpose of tonight is to share this information, and they're interested in getting any comments from the committee.
Thank you, Director Mike. My name is Rene Bale, and I'm with the City of Menlo Park. I'm the City Transportation Engineer. Thanks for the opportunity of having us give the presentation and getting your comments on this important Safe Routes to School project. This is the third Safe Routes to School project that the City of Menlo Park has done in partnership with the with the town of Atherton. The other two involves the Laurel School and Encinal School. A couple years ago, we, in partnership with the town of Atherton and San Mateo County, we got funding to implement the Safe Routes to School plan for Laurel School. We did install a couple of speed feedback display signs and in-pavement lighted crosswalks. And through the recent years, we've been applying, again, with the partnership with the town of Atherton, to get some outside funding to implement the improvements proposed in the Safe Routes to Encinal School. This project, Valparaiso Safe Routes to School plan, started in November. It was one of the our city council's project priority, and we hired Kimley Horn to assist the city in developing the Safe Routes to safe process school plan. And as Mike has alluded to, there are going to be some proposed improvements that are going to be in parts of town of Atherton, and that's why we're here to get your comments on those, as well as the overall plan, how it relates to the other improvements in Valparaiso. We've worked with the town of Atherton staff, David Hahn, who is the associate transportation engineer, in some of our committee meetings, as well as some residents from the town of Atherton that are involved with the bike to work for Encinal School. And we have conducted community meetings, couple of community meetings during the, I guess, one in February and one in May, in which we invited to some of the residents from Atherton that are part of the study area. As Mike also alluded to, we're here to get the comments from the commission tonight. We'll note all their comments, and we'll try to address these comments and bring these comments back to our Bicycle and Transportation Commission, as well as providing a response to the town of Atherton, and to show how we address these comments. Mike Maurer is the representative, or is a project manager for this safe process school plan, and he's here to make I think a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation. And at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, we'll be here to answer any questions, or if you need some clarification, and ultimately get the comments on the plan. So with that, I want to turn this to Mike Maurer from Kimley Horn. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'll get the projector turned on in a minute because I'd like you to be able to see the information that you have in your packet a little larger. I know specifically there's a map in there that's probably a little difficult to ascertain what we're proposing. So while I'm doing that, let me hand out actually a larger size plot for each of you. So as I talk about some of the elements that we're proposing, you have a little bit easier pictorial to follow us.
Let's pull down the screen here. Okay, who's going to stand on whose shoulders together? There is a pointer that, if you can find it.
Oh, there we go.
It might extend further.
Use a presentation and a shirt. Chairman, do you mind if I speak from here? Just close enough so I can control the slides a little bit.
What?
Do you mind if I speak from this position rather than?
No, I think unless anybody else objects, it's okay by me as long as you speak loudly enough that we can hear you.
Okay. So again, my name is Michael Mowry. I'm from Kimley Horn Associates, and we're primarily a transportation-based engineering firm. We are nationwide. We've been here in the Bay Area for about 20 years. And we've worked here on the peninsula, specifically in Menlo Park and Atherton, for probably at least 15 of those 20 years, doing a lot of safe routes to school work here and throughout the state, and also just other general transportation projects. I wanted to start tonight to talk about real quick the history of safe routes here in Menlo Park and Atherton. Hillview Middle School was completed about 8 to 10 years ago. Oak Knoll about 10 years ago, completed and constructed. Laurel Elementary School was constructed about 2 years or so ago. The study was done about 4 years, where there's improvements on Greenwood Avenue and some improvements on Coleman. I think more improvements may be coming. Insall Elementary, a study has been done, and the City of Menlo Park, in partnership with the Town of Atherton, has completed multiple grant applications and is still looking for a grant award in order to implement the improvements in those grants. The City of Menlo Park has also completed an alternate transportation to school study, which is focused on helping kids make better choices on and safer choices on biking and walking to school. And then right now where we're at is doing the Valparaiso Safe Routes to School study that, as the name would suggest, mainly focuses on Valparaiso Avenue, but does include Santa Cruz and some other major streets in the study area. The study area is bordered by Valparaiso on the north, Santa Cruz Avenue to the south, Elder Avenue in the west, and Laurel in the east. It includes, inside of that study area, Hillview School, just on the border, Sacred Heart School, Menlo School, St. Raymond is inside the study area, just on the border on Laurel's Nativity. And then we've included Oak Knoll and Encinal, more specifically because students that attend each of those schools live within the study area and therefore would use the elements that we're proposing. So obviously those schools are a little bit outside of the study area.
May I ask you a question? Who paid for the study?
The City of Menlo Park funded the study. Task one of the project, and I'm going to try and fly through kind of some of these initial tasks so that we can talk about the plan, because I think that's probably where you have most of your questions. We started the project in last September with a kickoff meeting for representatives from each of the schools, as well as staff from Menlo Park, the school district, and here at the Town of Atherton. As part of the data collection task, we collected vehicle counts, aerial photography, speed surveys, which are done on each of these roadways at a 5-year interval, and collision data. Highlighting those two pieces of data here on this slide, you can see that for the last speed survey done on Valparaiso, which I think speed surveying is actually your next item, although not specifically these roadways, you can see that Valparaiso's posted speed is 35 miles an hour. The measured 85th percentile speed, which is what engineers use to set the speed limit, was a little bit higher than that at 36 and 39. Why I'm making the point of that this evening is that both the Valparaiso section between Cotton and the western city limit, and then on Santa Cruz and Menlo Park, they're high enough, they're enough higher than the posted speed limit that may actually result in a higher posted speed limit the next time these roadways are studied. And as we're looking at safe routes to school, certainly vehicular speed is something we're concerned about. As a point of note, collisions that happen with pedestrian and bikes at about 25 miles an hour tend to result in injuries or fatalities at about a 40% rate. At 40 miles an hour, that rate goes all the way up to 90%. And so that's why speed matters. It makes sense. The faster vehicles traveling gets pedestrian and bicycle, the more likelihood of a major injury or fatality. Collisions themselves in the study area, there are not. These are pedestrian and bicycle collisions specifically, not vehicular to vehicle collisions. There's not a large amount of collisions for peds and bikes. We would typically classify a large amount as being at least one a year. However, you can see on Valparaiso the trend is that there are an increase in collisions over the last couple of years, where we've gone from 2 to 3 to 4 consistently through 2008 and in 2011. 2012 data is not yet available. Typically it takes about 3 months usually quickly, an existing conditions map, which is similar to what you see in front of you, shows the study area as the dashed black line. And then we just wanted to use this map to show where all the existing traffic control and devices are. So there's stop signs shown on your map, where the traffic signals are located. And then I believe there's 2 lighted crosswalks for pedestrians in the area. We conducted a number of public meetings for the project. The first, we wanted to specifically point at the school parent-teacher associations, as well as the school administrators and city staff. And so we had our first public meeting with approximately 20 members. The second 2 meetings were neighborhood meetings where approximately 2,500 residents of Menlo Park and Atherton were noticed of these meetings. And despite the large noticing, we ended up with approximately 20 people at each of these neighborhood meetings that took place in March and May. Following each of these meetings, we have attended the Menlo Park Transportation Commission twice and the Bicycle Commission once to receive their comment. And throughout this process, we had proposed, prior to public meeting number 2, a set of alternatives that I'll go through in a moment. And we've just refined those alternatives as we receive more input both from the public as well as the commissioners in Menlo Park. We're coming to you this evening, September 11th, to get the traffic committee's comments here on the plan, specifically the Atherton elements, to get your thoughts and comments. After the meeting this evening, we will be going back to the Transportation Commission and Bicycle Commission from Menlo Park, asking for their recommendation to the City Council, and then asking for the City Council's approval of the plan, as well as their approval for putting together a grant submission. Why this is important to this committee is that really for success, there is a grant program for Safe Routes to School at both the state, federal, and within the last year, regional level through San Mateo County. And the more partnership those groups see with adjoining towns, school districts, letters of support, or partnered applications, the higher likelihood of getting grant funding for the elements, typically for these projects. After the City Council approves the project, we will put together concept plans, which again will help with the grant funding in order to give the grant reviewers an idea of the elements and their design. So now kind of the meat of what I'd like to talk about tonight. I'll try to briefly go through them because I'm sure you'll have many questions, but the plan is in front of you as well. In fact, your copy might be a little bit better than what's projected on the screen. But I will start on Valparaiso Avenue and try to work through the elements as best I can. All of these elements come from our field observation ourselves. We've been out there multiple days. We've biked, we've walked, we've driven the corridors during school times in order to get the feel of each of those modes of travel. We've also talked to the bicycle coalition groups for both Menlo Park and Atherton and discussed their concerns, as well as all the commissioners and public that we've talked about. So the plan in front of you tonight is a blend of our engineering judgment for the data that we've received, our experience with safe routes projects that we've conducted, as well as the personal experiences of the residents and commissioners that we've heard to date on the project. So starting the plan, I'd like to start at the northeast corner, which is at the intersection of Laurel and Glenwood. I'm going to switch to a picture, so hopefully I can zoom in a little bit better. And discuss the evidence. Currently, there is an existing stop sign at this intersection. What we've observed and others have observed is there is a bike lane along Glenwood Avenue as well that oftentimes vehicles will park in that bike lane, and it is not signed as no parking, but any parked vehicle blocks at least half of the bike lane area. So we've recommended no parking in the bike lane between Laurel and the train tracks in order to provide that area for cyclists. At the intersection of Glenwood and El Camino, the comment that we've heard is just an insecurity in going through that intersection as a cyclist. riding it myself, there's ample room for both vehicles and cyclists, but knowing where to be as a cyclist tends to be the issue because the intersection does not align as a T at 90 degrees. You end up deviating to the right or left depending on which way you're going. So what we're suggesting at that intersection is there would be essentially a bike lane through the intersection. It would follow the crosswalk line, which kind of bumps out and then diagonally comes back. Just making it much more clear for the cyclists where they should ride and for the vehicles where the cyclists would be. Continuing west, there is a new, within the last year, lighted crosswalk at the intersection of Hoover and Valparaiso. That will remain. And then the next item that you'll see, which I'll zoom in even more, we tried to keep the plan on one drawing so that you can see all the elements at once, but obviously the hindrance of that is the size of the elements. What we're seeing on Valparaiso, and is probably the major safety concern on Valparaiso, except for the speeding, is that vehicles are using the bike lane to drive. This is typically happening during school periods where vehicles are waiting to make a left turn, either southbound or northbound into the private school campuses, and vehicles are, rather than waiting for them, using the bike lane to pass. As a point of note, you can drive in a bike lane for up to 200 feet to make a right turn. That is a legal maneuver. You cannot use a bike lane as a passing lane. And so, essentially, everybody who's doing that is performing an illegal maneuver. I have seen PD out there ticketing that. But they also are just in general creating an unsafe condition for cyclists, not knowing when a vehicle would come out into the bike lane. We're trying to address that twofold. One is that we are suggesting, I believe it's 10 signs. They would say, do not pass in bike lane. We have positioned them at what we would say are decision points along the corridor. So this sign specifically, this sign we've actually moved just a little bit east, I should say, to remind people waiting for the individuals turning left at Hoover that they cannot use the bike lane to pass. We've done this specifically at most of the school intersections, just ahead of the school intersection to remind vehicles again they can't use the bike lane to pass.
How much,
I'm sorry?
have you looked at the maximum backup of traffic waiting to turn left?
Towards El Camino?
Or is it 20 cars or 5 cars? Or
I'm sorry, which direction, Jim?
in order to turn left, the cars back up and then people go into the bike lane, right?
Yes, sir.
Have you examined the number of cars that are waiting to turn left at the busiest time?
We do have left turn movements for each of those, but what we've observed is it only takes one car for the car behind them to decide that they'd like to use the bike lane to pass.
Right, just that, it's a very long line of cars that are going to use the bike lanes for a long time, right?
If we get 5 or 6 cars, they would pass all, they would pass all 5 or 6 cars to get.
Which increases the danger.
Exactly. But, as a cyclist, the major safety issue that I felt as I rode the corridor is, for instance, on Santa Cruz, when vehicles will be backing up, you can see there are reverse lights. And so as cyclists, you have a visual idea of what the vehicle's doing. In this situation, you're trying to ride, and you're at your 15 miles an hour or so, and then the vehicle can come out without turning on the turn signal, any warning, and essentially hit you as a cyclist. So the other element, and probably the more major element that we're proposing here on Valparaiso, is what most people are kind of terming as green bike lanes.
Could you go back to that for a minute? I have a couple of questions, please.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
First question is, there are swales along that part of the road, and probably for quite a distance, and people have been using those swales for walking. I don't remember, Mike, the swales and the bike lane, where are the swales with regard to the bike lane?
In that particular area, I can't recall exactly what, where they are in relationship to one another.
Do you remember?
Are you talking about the kind of dirt area?
No, it's a concrete swale.
Yeah.
And then there's a bike lane. But what is the width of the swale, and where is the bike lane as juxtaposed to the swale? because there's a lot of vegetation and there are telephone poles, because that was why that whole Hoover crosswalk came into being, because they didn't want to walk to the light, because there were telephone poles and guide wires and vegetation, and so they said that they were walking in the swales, and the problem with vehicles going into the bike lane, and it wasn't safe, so that's why that whole crosswalk came into being. So where are the swales? What is the width of the swales, and where are the bike lanes in that area? And that's the first question. And then, what is the point of the sign? You're putting it on the Atherton side, right?
Yes, for westbound traffic.
For westbound traffic.
So, and that sign that is currently shown in the wrong place. It should be to the right, just before the Hoover Street left. So that sign is a little too far west. It should move. Move my cursor. It probably should move to about where the hand is now.
The point I'm making is, just to sort of follow up here, if there's a long line of traffic waiting to turn left, you need to have a sign, right at the end of that traffic, maybe two signs, because if you make it for a one-car left turn, then the people don't see it if there's a long line.
And I'll point that out when we come to the other locations. We tried to put it where we would think is the back of that left turn.
And there's no turn lane at Hoover? Okay, and then the question is, what is the width of the roadbed at that point? And is that sign in a place where it's not going to be obscured, or is going to be readily in a line of sight with all the stuff that's in that area? Because that's an issue. There's a lot of, junk along that area.
So I think what you're determining is the swale. So the bike lane is on the edge of the asphalt pavement.
Right, and then the swale.
And then after that, just north of that until you get to the property line. So in kind of this area right here, I would say at that location, the swell is probably 10 to 15 feet deep between the edge of the roadway to the property line to a fence. I think in that location there's a lot of trees, and I think that's possible.
Oh, it can't be 10 to 15 feet
No,
deep.
it can't be that way.
No, it's only, it's got to be maybe 2 feet,
It's very-
maybe 2 feet,
very short.
and then there's property.
Well, there's a new compacted granite path that goes from the light crosswalk to Victoria, and I believe the width of that path is 5 or 6 feet. So it must be a little wide.
And the granite path, Mike, goes all the way to El Camino?
No, it only goes to Victoria.
Only to Victoria. And is there a clear line of sight for where that sign would be located, so we wouldn't have people saying that there's an issue with visibility? Mike?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to.
Is there a clear line of sight for the location of that sign, so we wouldn't have people claiming that there's an issue with visibility? There's so much stuff around that area.
I think the thing, what is being presented here is really kind of a plan level. The exact locations will be determined out in the field so that there isn't any visibility issues. I think the purpose here is really to provide a representation of the types of signage, the types of information that's going to be provided to the drivers to help to hopefully get more compliance with the law. So I don't know that I get too much into the detail of where the signs are, because you're right. I mean, there are certain places where they will not be visible, but whenever these types of projects are implemented, the signs are they're actually physically located in the field so that they are in fact visible, and they don't provide any obstructions.
Okay. And you don't know that we have any other signs in that same area there that would create any kind of conflict, huh?
No, and that'll be part of the field review of the actual project that gets implemented.
Okay, thank you.
In looking at this, a satellite photo of that, it actually looks like there's sort of a lined off island there areas there where they actually put in a left turn lane.
There is that line.
There's
Remember,
on-street
we
parking.
discussed different ways. When they had Rockbuster there, we put that area in because people were crossing over.
Yeah.
So they may be able to.
Which would,
We can look at that. I know there's on-street parking on the south side, so you might have to remove
But even
that.
a left turn lane is only good if you've got one or two cars. I mean, you got the same situation at university here.
Correct.
They have a left turn lane, but you know, you get more than two cars with that.
So continue to move west. Well, I'm sorry. So I was starting to discuss the green bike lane. So the major element that we are proposing for better visualization on Valparaiso for the cyclists is to do the green bike lanes with green paint. There are currently locations throughout the Bay Area that have these installations. Listed them here: San Francisco, Santa Clara. Actually, Palo Alto has one on Channing Avenue, which is where this picture is taken. The reason for that is that Oregon has had these bike lanes for over a decade now, and recent studies show that the compliance, both yielding to cyclists as well as just slowing down, increases the compliance approximately 20% for each of those. And so they've become a pretty useful tool. The Bicycle Commission from the City of Menlo Park, really like this idea, and we're hoping that this allows that visual separation between the cyclists and the vehicles that reinforces the fact that the vehicles are not supposed to use the bike lane for travel.
Does it hold up well?
It does hold up well. The original issues with it when it first came out, well, it's been out in Europe for years, but more in the States in the last 5 years, is that they were using a typical street paint, thermoplastic paint, which is kind of slick. And so if you've got a 4 foot wide area of slick paint and you've got rainy weather, you can see in the winter there'd be an issue. So now contractors are either using that paint, putting sand in it to create a texture, or just using texture paint. So essentially giving some friction to the paint itself.
So what would that cost, Mike? Any idea?
I actually have cost estimates as part of the presentation.
One other issue with crossing that intersection at El Camino with the bike lane, besides the fact that that intersection does not, the two streets don't line up, which has always been an issue, is that camera is a pretty active camera at that intersection. I know because I've seen a whole bunch of times that camera going off. Is there any safety issue with bicyclists crossing, and that when it goes off, it's blinding? Have they considered that as a safety issue?
I'm not sure if it's been considered a safety issue. I don't know why I could be aware of.
I don't think it's a safety issue. I mean, it comes under just a flash, and I don't think it's going to blind bicyclists.
It's not blinding, it's just disconcerting, especially to the drivers.
So the bike lanes are proposed, the green bike lanes are proposed all the way from El Camino to Elder, where most of the cyclists are riding. The next element is there is an existing school zone sign just at the first driveway to Menlo School. We are proposing to update that sign to the current standard. It will say basically the same information, but also adding a small flashing beacon to the sign, reminding traffic that it's 25 miles an hour while children are present. That would be just in front of Sacred Heart, so we wouldn't place it in front of residences, and it would be for traffic heading westbound. The nice thing about the plan for Valparaiso from the speeding standpoint is that right now the two schools actually have two separate school zones defined. And what we found is just because of the overlap, the MUTCD, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about as committee members in the years to come, which is the Caltrans approved manual for signs, allows us to combine those two school zones and actually create a large school zone from this location just on the eastern edge of Menlo School all the way to Elena on the western edge of Sacred Heart. And so during school periods where children are present, police department can enforce a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit for that large section, which we feel is a large improvement.
We have, it's maybe slightly outside the jurisdiction, but St. Joseph's has a lot of kids there. is on Everly, just slightly north of here. And it's a big school with young kids, and I don't know if they're considered it or not.
Unfortunately, it's just outside of study area. I think the town may be doing its own study on all this. I'm just consider it. The next element that we're proposing is a speed feedback sign. So this is the "Your Speed Is" sign. Hopefully on Valparaiso it says 35 or 34 every time, but we know it's faster than that. The experience with these signs is that compliance goes up to about 90%, and so a lot of times people ask, well, how much is that going to reduce the speed? Well, it actually depends on the road. So in South Valparaiso, people tend to travel about 40 miles an hour when they can, when it's not congested. So we would say on this roadway that the compliance being 90%, most people will come back down to that 35 miles an hour. So you'll see a 4 to 5 mile an hour drop in their speed. Certainly a roadway where they're exceeded by 10 miles an hour, we would expect a larger drop.
But you know, the trouble with these signs is, especially the ones that use the sun to charge the batteries, an awful lot of them just don't work.
Yeah, but this would be like the one on Oak Grove, which they've
Would
already
it-
completed, which is not solar powered.
Would
and it's
this be
very,
wired in?
It would completely depend on the placement. We've looked at the placement actually for these signs this afternoon. We may be able to find a solar placement. If not, we would hardwire them to power so that they could be.
Because the hardwired ones work fine.
One element that we would appreciate the committee's comments on this evening is we already have this kind of concern from Menlo Park commissioners about the time for these signs to be lighted. The school sign specifically, we would only have the beacon on during school periods. And so it would pretty much be during daylight hours from 7:30 to 9 in the morning, probably 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon, or whatever would correspond specifically with the schools. The speed feedback sign, some of those signs are on 24 hours if there's a concern from the city or town that they're speeding, and some of those signs are just during daylight hours because of residents' concern of a lighted bulb in the evening outside the residence. Really asking for the committee's comments if you feel like that might be a concern of the residents in the area, that these were on during nighttime hours, the lighted apparatus would disturb the residents.
wouldn't this one be,
It's on the Sacred Heart side, but it certainly could be seen from the residential properties
How
on
many-
the park side.
how many residential properties are there?
No, quite a few on the other side.
Yeah, and that location is pretty much single families lining the south side of the street.
Well, you know, the one that you have on Oak Grove certainly works better than any sign I know of in Atherton, with the possible exception of the one that we have on Watkins, which is hardwired.
Yeah.
None of the others work. They don't. And speeding is a big concern here in Atherton. It's probably one of the top 5 concerns that we have constantly on this committee. So I don't see any reason it should just be limited, I don't know how you feel, but just limited to school hours. Valparaiso is a major thoroughfare for people. And I think, given the fact that more and more the police have outstanding obligations that, and a thin police presence as far as enforcing traffic laws, it would be nice to have a sign like that. Lots of times you don't realize how fast you're going, and that sign is a nice awakening. It's certainly not rude, but that the sign on Oak Grove certainly reminds you that you need to slow down.
And Encinal's the same.
So,
Encinal's good.
so I think that it's not a bad thing to have. And we have the one on Watkins that's all the time, and I don't think we've had any complaints about people saying it's flashing. So
If it's hardwired, I'd say keep it on 24 hours a day.
I think there's always a safety concern because you never know when the schools are going to be in session. I mean, they have evening activities. You never know when people are walking. People like to walk even in the evenings or when there are sports events. A lot of the schools have evening events. Or they're not even sports. So if there are accidents occurring, and there are, if there are safety issues, and there are, then why not have the signs lighted?
How does the rest of the committee feel on this item?
I'd like to see the signs on all the time.
Okay.
How about you, John?
I agree.
Mike?
I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, the one thing that I'm not as clear on is I'm trying to picture that in my mind. On the Menlo Park side, there are a number of houses that are there, which is different from Watkins. There's not a wall, and they're close together. But I just can't see how it would be that disturbing. Just, I don't see the downside to it.
No, I mean, in Watkins, there are houses on the other side of the street too.
Yeah, they're set back a little further, I think, than the ones in that area.
On Oak Grove, their house is on the other side, and that
That's
thing
right.
really flashes.
You're right. You're right.
So I guess
And nobody's ever complained about that.
Well, I've never heard a complaint.
Sounds like the general feeling is 24 hours.
Good. I'll continue to move west. Intersection of University, there's a number of little modifications that we're proposing. Going northbound on University, currently that is one lane just heading into the middle school campus. What's happening is that because of the parking there, a lot of cyclists are getting scrunched in and feel uncomfortable, and then also that signal has such a short cycle that anybody turning right, going northbound right, coming up University onto Valparaiso, doesn't typically have the time to do so. So we're recommending a no parking area here and using the parking area as a right turn area for approximately 4 to 6 vehicles, 100 to 150 feet at that intersection. The other item is that we've suggested modifying the signal time during school hours. You can, with a lot of controllers, put in a specific time, say for this location 7:30 to 8:30, where we provide more time for the lefts into the school or the exiting traffic out of the school, hoping to control that intersection a little bit better. I believe that the middle school traffic has improved a bit since they adopted and are implementing their TDM plan, but it's still certainly a congested location.
How do you
Is that a Menlo Park away? Who's one of those?
That is owned by Menlo Park, yes. And then the last item is, because of some heritage trees, the bike lane going westbound, so on the north side of the street, ducks behind the trees in this location. It goes up around the trees to the north, so it is not a line continuing through the intersection. Probably on this figure we should do a little jog. What's happening is that traffic turning into middle school then is not looking to the cyclists because they're no longer just to the right and just in front of them. And so we suggest a sign here for cyclists to yield to cross traffic, just to make the cyclists aware that that's oncoming traffic is not stopped. Here's a location for another do not pass sign. We placed this sign at this location upstream of the people turning left onto Johnson Street. So this would be approximately 100 feet in front of Johnson, so about a 4-vehicle queue turning left, going south on Johnson, which is about what we've seen. We've tended to see less vehicles in a queue for the southbound left, or going south, excuse me, than people turning left into the middle school, Sacred Heart, Emily Irving. We are suggesting a lighted crosswalk or some other type of enhanced crossing treatment at Emily and Valparaiso. This is supported by Sacred Heart Schools, and there's a lot of students that cross in this location. Sacred Heart Schools, if this is implemented, has discussed maybe doing a walking path on this part of campus, but then also pull students off of Emily and allow them to walk through the treat area and remove them from the students. This could be either an in-pavement lighted crosswalk, which I know after TNM and the Park have, or there are some new applications which are called rapid rectangular flashing beacons. And essentially it still has the same flashes that are in the ground, but it moves it up to eye level. And so it's about at a 5-foot level, and that flasher happens at that level rather than in pavement. And it's a new application over about the last year. A lot of jurisdictions have started to prefer that method. They feel like the driver eye is easier to see. It tends to work better in daylight conditions, where if there's glare, sometimes the in-pavement ones, drivers have difficulty seeing. We haven't determined which of those applications we would do, but one of those enhanced crossing applications.
Well, you know, the ones on Middlefield, from 5th Avenue north, there's 2 lighted crosswalks there. And boy, they're really effective in my mind. Really effective. You know, I wish we had those in El Camino, frankly. because they just make such a difference. I mean, I know myself when I'm driving up there, once these things start to flash, boy, you know, it just triggers. Somebody's about to cross, get ready to stop.
Now you're going to discuss costs
Yes.
later
There's
on.
one right by the post
Yes.
office too, huh?
And by the library, the
Fairly,
Park
yeah.
Library.
Yeah.
Do not pass again. We're showing this sign for eastbound traffic before they turn on to Emily, and then here before they turn on to San Mateo for people making that a left going southbound. On your plan, you'll see this striped hatch red line on the south side. A major focus of Safe Routes to School is walking and biking. So I've talked a lot about biking so far. We want to provide a location for walking as well. And so we looked at Valparaiso at the north side as well as the south side of the street, if there was a preference for walking area, and looking at it from a cost consideration. To us, it makes more sense to provide a contiguous path on the south side of the street on the Menlo Park side because of the lower cost to implement. There is currently, along the frontage of Menlo School and Sacred Park, there is room to add a sidewalk, but there's a larger swell there, there's a larger dirt area. Installing a sidewalk would mean a lot of drainage issues. It would be very costly. And rather on the Menlo Park side, there's a lot of already just kind of compacted dirt areas or gravel areas that would be relatively easy to come back and add a small asphalt pad. And while it wouldn't necessarily be a conventional concrete 5-foot sidewalk with curb and gutter, which I know is somewhat rare in Atherton, Menlo Park at times, it would be a solid walking surface, an asphalt pad where students, parents, residents could walk on the south side of the roadway from all the way from El Camino to Elder. We've shown the locations where we would need to do this improvement in order to provide that contiguous path on the south side. So there's already actually concrete sidewalk between El Camino and University, so it really would be between University and Elder. And there's some areas that already have good walking areas. There's others we'd like to.
And the city has a right of way that entire, but the homeowners do have some vegetation in that area.
There's very little, so each of these little letters on here are actually field notes for us saying how long the distance is and then noting those vegetation or trees. There's very few, I think there maybe are a couple trees that might need to be removed. There's actually not too much of low-level bushes or vegetation that we have to take out to do it. This lighted crosswalk already exists at the Sacred Heart School entrance. And then now we're at the intersection of Elena and Valparaiso. We've currently shown a signal in the plan for this. I know there's a lot of history at this location on Valparaiso. Both Sacred Heart and Menlo School did expansions in student population as well as physical expansion on Sacred Heart School, which are environmental documents, looked at putting a signal at this location. Both of those studies found that the location just barely falls short of meeting the requirements to install a signal. And those requirements are set again by state regulation. However, both of those schools and in cities, a lot of people feel like the safety of Valparaiso would be improved if a signal were installed at these locations because the traffic from the side street is so great that they're trying to find gaps in traffic, and so create a safety issue. What we're recommending as part of the plan is to continue to essentially monitor this intersection and do counts on an annual basis to see when it meets the threshold. I think both the schools have said they're very interested in the signal. They have funded an improvement at this location, which is a left and a right turn. Technically right now there's just one lane exiting, but they would still be interested in looking at the signal at this location. Okay. Similar to going westbound, going eastbound, we've located a speed feedback sign and a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit sign with children of residents coming into this combined school zone. So this will take place just ahead of the Elena intersection. And continuing westbound, now reaching Elder, we have proposed another lighter crosswalk at this location. This was to help students traveling to Hillview or other cyclists that may be uncomfortable with the left turn. This is one of the left turns that the chairman mentioned that I think fits 1.5 vehicles. It's very short, it's about 75 feet. And so as a cyclist, you feel like you're in the middle of traffic to make that maneuver. This light crosswalk will not only allow pedestrians a safer crossing, but if cyclists want to cross the north side and then walk their bike across the crosswalk, they could continue down Elder after that.
And what is the ramp that you would have?
Currently there is vegetation at that corner, so to have a sidewalk that goes somewhere rather than a sidewalk or a crosswalk that goes nowhere, we would have to clean up some of the vegetation and install a ramp at this location so that the crosswalk filtered into a walking area. On Elder, I'll try and go through these a little fast because I know the Menlo Park improvements. What we've seen here near the Hillview School area is that vehicles don't park consistently. So sometimes they park up against the grassy area for the homes, and sometimes they park up closer against the street. And on this area, there's the parking pads that are about 10 feet wide where people can park or walk. What we're asking people to do with these signs is geometrically asking them to, and this says park against the gutter, and then showing a walking icon to allow walking space against the homeowner's side of the parking lot. We've shown some small improvements with refreshing crosswalk striping. Also, there was a recent signal installed and completed at the intersection of Elder and Santa Cruz. On Santa Cruz, where the city is currently, or is just negotiating with the contractor to install, to install 3 lighted crosswalks, similar to what we're proposing on Valparaiso, at the intersections of Olive, at Cotton, and at San Mateo. And then similar to on Valparaiso, we suggested school zone flashers as well as speed feedback signs entering the school zone area, entering from the west and entering to the east at near Hillview, and then speed feedback signs in the middle of the corridor to try and slow traffic. Downtown Menlo Park, we're suggesting some share the road signs, 2 in each direction, both entering downtown as well as the midway downtown. And then along, I think the last element that is just is adjacent to the Nativity School is a no stopping at any time. People are again parking their bike lane at this location. We're recommending that sign implementation so that they could not park there at any time. So costs. We have itemized the costs. These are approximate, as Mike said, during design. These would be found a lot more specific. This is not in your packet. It was not included in the report as yet. It will be in the final project documentation. Along Valparaiso, including the traffic signal, which we at this point would not include as part of the project, it's about $631,000 worth of improvements. Santa Cruz 86, Elder 36, and Laurel will be showing the one sign location. The important number I want to point to is the total project cost is $754. But if we remove that $300,000 because it would not be part of the plan at this time, we're talking about $454. And why that's important is the grant funding that I mentioned earlier for state and federal grants, the maximum is $500,000. And so a lot of cities and counties come in with about $300,000 to $400,000 worth of work. So we're about in that zone of a typical cost estimate. For,
I'm sorry, you said what 300,000?
The traffic signal. Okay.
So,
just because at this point it's not, it doesn't meet requirements. We probably will include it in the initial grant.
Have we applied for the grant yet?
So we will apply for the grant after the conclusion of this study. The study again will be going to the commissions and the council of Menlo Park, and once that's completed, the city will apply for the next grant cycle. One will likely come out later this fall.
So, I mean, the likelihood of anything starting this year is not very high.
No. The grant submissions, if they happen this fall, is probably due by the end of the year. There's a 2-month lag, and then there's actually time for Caltrans to give you the money.
So we're done.
You're talking at least a year away before something is built. That's
That traffic signal, is that the one that you're not sure you have the data to support it?
right. So at this point, it would not be included in the initial grant.
That seems low for a 4-way traffic signal, because for the one that we now have on Middlefield, which is a 3-way traffic signal, that was $330,000. And that was a while ago.
I mean, I would send quite a few traffic signals. The range that we would typically see for a new traffic signal is about 250 to 300, just as a typical range. If you're doing a redesign of traffic signal, maybe 150 to 200, sometimes based on specific elements.
Does that include road sensors? Does that include road sensors for the traffic signal?
Road sensors.
Well,
I mean, the detectors?
yeah.
Yes. That includes all the detectors.
So, I mean, they can control it, so.
Yes, that's all the controls. Sometimes at certain intersections, and maybe true at the Middlefield intersections, the installation may
So, I mean,
include
on a
new
quiet-
ADA. Yeah,
On a
new
quiet
ADA
day,
lamps.
it would stay at green unless there was some other car.
Right.
Okay.
But specific intersections may cost more if there's new pedestrian input, ADA ramps that need to be required, maybe some sidewalk changes where you can put in full. Sometimes they could cost more.
And what do you have down as the price? Forgive me, I don't.
That's fine.
For the lighted crosswalk, you said that there was a new kind.
Right, we're showing 50. The in-pavements out there right now, depending on the vendor, tend to cost somewhere between 45 and 60. The rapid rectangular flashing beacons are costing less now at about 30. So we've shown the higher cost to make sure that we're within really under a $500,000 range to make sure that all of our elements will work in overall cost.
I mean, the ones they use in Britain, there's 2 poles on each side of the crosswalks with lights up here, and you can trigger them just the same way as you do these others, and they flash onto the intersection. They seem to be quite effective as well.
Mike, could I ask you, how much did the Hoover crosswalk cost?
Actually, I'm going to ask Renee if you can remember. What I recall, it was around $60,000 to $70,000 is what I recall.
That's Renee's recollection as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my recollection is that it was more than 50,000 as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Again, we've kind of used that as a.
Huh?
It was around 70,000.
Yeah, I know. All the numbers that I remember for
About
the
70,000.
things that are up there are always more expensive. Why are we paying more?
Yeah.
Well, that's, as I said, I think the in-pavement that we've seen are around 60, so that's not too far off of what the Hoover Crossing was. The Hoover Crossing did include some of those extras, as we talked about, with the asphalt path on the north side. This is really
No, it
just
didn't. That wasn't included in the cost of the crosswalk.
the overall. Yeah, it was for that full installation.
Oh, are you, is this the end of your presentation?
Well, so briefly, I want to talk about what we're calling phase 2. It's really, we want to get your input, but it is not something that we would plan to implement very soon. The question that we got resoundingly through the first couple public meetings was, you've got all these elements and that's great, but why don't we just add some left turns on Valpo Horizon? So that way people aren't trying to scoot by traffic. It just will handle the capacity of some of these left turns more easily. And so we looked at that option. This would be adding left turns between Elena and University, where it already has a left turn going eastbound, and westbound. You can do this by adding just a couple of feet of pavement on the north edge of roadway, so on the applicant side. I should orient everybody. This is the plan from Elena, coming west, going east, and then continuing east to University. But the major items to note is that adding just the left turn lanes, you do not have to widen the roadway significantly, but it would, to not widen the roadway, you would have to remove some of the parking for residents on the south side, which are Menlo Park residents. There's approximately 15 properties that would be affected, or on-street parking would need to be removed. The approximate cost of this, it's probably at the upper end of that range, is about $250,000, and it's because most of this exercise is restriking the roadway. We're not adding a lot of pavement to the roadway. We continue to have 4-foot bike lane. We would just be removing parking on the south side.
Well, I think that's a good idea, but I don't think that eliminates driving in the bike lanes, because left turn lanes only affect 2 or 3 cars. I keep bringing this up. I mean, I've driven along there, along Black Road, people are waiting to turn left on University.
Right.
Man, they can be backed up for 10 cars, and therefore, a left turn lane wouldn't help that.
Well, we try to install, so at Sacred Heart, I think the left turn lane is about 150 feet. That would be for 6 vehicles. Again, 10 would not be enough. At Emily, it's 125 feet. Actually, no, I'm sorry, it's 150 as well, so it would be for 6 vehicles. At Elena, because the roadway narrows with property lines west of Elena, it would be a much shorter turn there. I think it would be 4 to 5.
Well, I mean, they would help.
It helps. The other more expensive option, and we know likely would not happen, what we're calling a full widening. What this would do is it would widen the roadway about 8 to 10 feet on the north edge, and which would require relocation of 20 to 25 power poles that are all pretty close to the roadway edge on the north side. A couple of heritage trees would potentially and likely need to be removed. And what this would do is, rather than just the left turn lane, this would install, similar to Santa Cruz Avenue, a 2-way left turn lane down the middle of the roadway. So essentially you'd have a continuous left turn lane between Elena and University. You would most likely relieve the issue of people trying to pass through, both turning into the residence as well as to the side streets. It's a much more expensive project, depending on if PG&E or the town or city had to relocate those power poles. It would probably be $5,000 to $700,000. To talk about from a grant funding standpoint, it wouldn't fit into an initial grant application. This type of project would more likely be submitted for, say, a safety grant down the road.
Doesn't PG&E have to remove those poles?
The enterprise agreement,
free?
they should have to move them through the enterprise agreements. It's the cost of moving the poles is pretty much in that range for what it would cost. But certainly, if they moved them, it would be at the lower end of that cost.
They have to pay. Doesn't PG&E have to pay for that?
Well, most franchise agreements they do. Sometimes PG&E will treat it as if they will move the pole the first time, and they will ask you to move it the second time. They essentially don't want to go out every 2 years and move a pole for big traffic improvement that the city or town implements. I don't believe those poles have been relocated recently whatsoever. So
they would have to pay for it.
Bigger issue with the heritage trees.
Yes.
What is the process for all of this work? I mean, you're going to go out and try and get grants from Safe Routes to Schools and then sort of chop it up and do it in pieces?
Well, so the first piece is a big piece. We feel that we can do all the elements shown in the plan except for the traffic signal in one grant application. So for example, the Laurel School Safe Routes to School grant, which included improvements on Ringwood, on Bay, at the Pullman intersection, and what's the name of the school? Edge, thank you. Was the city of Menlo Park received $441,000, I believe. So about this number, and that was a federal. Yes, that was a federally funded Safe Routes to School grant. So we feel as if this is quality application for about the same amount that the city had received in the past. Both applicant and the school district supported that, and ultimately that project was built.
But you would take out the signal, the traffic signal, because it wouldn't qualify
At
for.
this time, correct.
So that would be about a $330,000 grant application?
If specifically that signal was implemented, yes. I think.
Or not implemented?
Well, I'm sorry, not implemented, but if it went on its own application, yes, that's about what it would be. The history of Safe Routes to School is they tended to fund projects that have a lot of small improvements in a larger area, rather than, say, for specifically funding sidewalk improvements. A lot of cities try to come in and build a lot of sidewalks, which isn't very cost effective for how many improvements that you get. Sidewalks just tend to be pretty expensive. And so my recommendation would not be to go to a Safe Routes application for a new traffic signal. It would probably be a different grant funding system like an HSIP, which is a hazardous safety improvement grant program for a signal like that, rather than a Safe Routes to School grant specifically just for a signal.
Okay, so, but as you speak, you wouldn't add something else back in when you take out that traffic signal, is that correct?
No, we want to stay, and I think you may have been returning on this. So the maximum funding for either of the Safe Routes to School grant funding programs is $500,000. And so without the signal, we'd be at 454. We're in that range of where we'd like to be.
Oh, you would go for all of these things in one grant. I see. And has anyone done any kind of evaluation of what this would mean to traffic flow along Valparaiso with all of these lighted crosswalks and along this path and these turn signs and
as far as how many times people
delays.
Stop or delays.
Mm-hmm.
We have not estimated the number of minutes of delay or seconds of delay, shouldn't be minutes, added to a driver during congested periods. During congested periods, I wouldn't believe it would add a lot of added time. It would just be stopping at specific locations rather than, say, behind the queue of vehicles. Certainly during uncongested time, if people were to push a light crosswalk button that before traffic didn't stop for them, you'd be adding whatever their crossing distance is. So you'd be adding about 20 seconds at minimum to their trip, because that's how long it would take the individual to cross.
But clearly, shouldn't they have some kind of an evaluation done of the affected intersections? Because you also don't know what the frequency of the pressing of the crosswalk is. I mean, if they can only press a crosswalk once every 2 minutes, that's one thing. That you have a lot of lighted crosswalks that you're going to be adding, and even if you say they can only press it once every 2 minutes, if they're pressing it here and they're pressing it here, those kinds of delays, what will it do to the intersection, for example, up at the Alameda or the intersection at El Camino? And what is is it an E intersection? Is it an F intersection? What kind of wait period does it have now? And what is it going to do to traffic on El Camino? I mean, it's all well and good to have all of these things that you're doing, but I think that you'd want to know what it's going to be doing to the other intersections, what their value is now, and what the effect on these other intersections is going to be, in order to assess your timing of some of these improvements.
But I think, Kathy, we look at it as a Safe Routes to School situation, and that's the number one priority. I'm not sure that it's going to be significant for delays. If we're really going to worry about Safe Routes to School, then so it delays people going along Valparaiso. I'm not sure that would be a number two or number three.
It's not just delaying people along Valparaiso. It could be delaying people along Alameda, which is another school corridor, and delaying people along El Camino, which is another school corridor, and delaying people along Middlefield, which is another school corridor. I mean, it has a cumulative effect. you need to know what the effect is, because it doesn't mean that you give these improvements up. It just means you determine what you're going to do in terms of timing, and I don't mean timing of building, timing of you know, how often you allow it to be pressed, you know, how frequently they're going to be able to press them. Maybe, you know, they can't do them at the same time. I mean, it's like the corporation yard in Redwood City. If you've ever noticed, they have it so that as soon as you get up to that light, you can always turn, always, because they're the corporation yard and they've set that timer. So you can do anything you want, but you need to know what the effect is on all these other centers, which also have safe route to school effects as well. So you don't live in a vacuum, and you need to know what the effect is when you're making this many changes to the corridor.
Is there some way to predict that effect?
We can, so a couple items. So we have done pedestrian counts on the corridor, so we can look at how many times we would think pedestrians, or we would estimate pedestrians would activate the crossings during mostly school hours, since that's primarily when it would be. Each of the lighted crossings would be a standalone crossing, so they're not timed or coordinated where traffic signals on El Camino are. They would be only activated when a pedestrian pushed the button. They wouldn't be activated without a pedestrian call, without a pedestrian push button. So most likely they would only be activated, well, not most likely. Most of the time they would only be activated during the school period, and obviously as residents use the area as well. We can, again, estimating the number of times a pedestrian would push the button with the head counts we have. The best we could do is estimate the added seconds of delay on the corridors that the average driver might have during those periods. So right now it takes them 40 seconds to drive end to end. Probably actually takes longer than that. You know, it might be a minute 20 if both light crosswalks are activated.
Could I ask you, does this include the green pane?
Yes, it does. It's
Does
down
this
there.
include the green pane? I can't
Yes.
quite see it.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
it
down
does.
there.
Yes, it does.
So you can't simulate this? You don't typically simulate a system like this?
Well, so it's not, like I said, it's not coordinated. The best we can do is we can look at the average number of times someone push the button. We know how long it's going to take them to cross the crosswalk, which is how long the vehicle's going to be delayed. And we would show then how much added time they would be delayed on. But it's not, the lighted crosswalks as pedestrian enhancement device aren't coordinated the way that we would coordinate traffic signals to improve traffic. Again, the primary reason for them would be improve pedestrian safety, which there's always that trade-off: pedestrian, bicycle safety, and improved traffic flow. Often the two conflict with one another.
And I understand the concept. I'm sorry, but my question is, I understand the concept of everything you described here, as I could tell. Any slowdown would essentially result from increased compliance with already existing laws that are on the books. When you're saying don't get in the bike lane, don't stop when a pedestrian's crossing the crosswalk, right?
Correct. And I mean, the two lighted crosswalks. Well, the lighted crosswalk at Elder is a new crosswalk, but there's already a crosswalk going across Beltline. So essentially, it's already a crosswalk. The lighted crosswalk at Emily would be a new crossing. So that would be the only one that would have add delay on the Beltline corridor. Everything else, as you said, would essentially be compliance with the speed limits and driver behavior.
I was going to comment that actually the pedestrian crossings might help, because if you try to go up like Crane or one of those streets and turn onto Valparaiso between 3 and 6, it's gridlock. It's just gridlock backed up from El Camino, and it's very hard to get on there. So you might, with the pedestrian crossings further toward Alameda, be spacing cars out more so they wouldn't back up so much. I mean, you don't know. It's one of those things you sort of have to put it in and see what happens. I think. But my other comment is that just looking at my satellite photos on my iPhone, it does look like there's room for left turn lanes at Hoover and at Johnson. And I would sort of suggest, I think you were just talking about further toward Alameda for adding left turn lanes.
Well, Johnson would be included, but Hoover would not.
Yeah, I would look at that because I think it looks like there's an island there that can be turned into a left turn lane right now. I agree with Jim that if you get too many cars, they still stop, block the traffic. But a lot of the times, it's just one or two cars that are blocking all the traffic. So the left turn lane would help in those cases.
Hey, I think you guys did some great work here, and I want to thank you for that. A couple of things that I noticed, being an avid of public safety and also an avid bicyclist, ride both dirt bikes and road bikes. Did I say something else? One of the questions I had was, or one of the thoughts I had was on your collision record, there's no indication of PCF, primary collision factor. So if over a period of 6 years you had 35 accidents, and let's say only one of those involved, or two of those involved a pedestrian, and say 5 involved a cyclist, and I told you that 4 of the 5 accidents involving the cyclist were the cyclist's fault and not related to excessive speed, and then we look at the plan and we have a lot of money going for things to control speed. I know we're trying to create these safe routes, but we're also trying to reduce these number of accidents. So to me, I really think you guys need to dial down on that a little more and make that part of that overall program. So one of the things I think that, the 3 parts of traffic engineering and traffic safety is education, engineering, and enforcement. I think a lot could be done in education in the schools about bicycle safety for these kids, and we try to do some of that with bicycle rodeo. My experience has been too on this bicyclist issue, and a lot of avid bicyclists get upset with me, is that generally somewhere around 50 to 70% of the cyclist collisions, the PCF is the cyclist's fault. And just to prove that, I had Tim Marks look at the 6 that are in the packet here, and 4 of them are the cyclist's fault. So that's 2/3. So I think when you're asking policymakers to spend, $750,000, I think there really needs to be a clear nexus of how it's creating safety, what is it reducing, how is it facilitating, and really lay that out. And I've also submitted for a lot of grants, and I think you're almost there. But I think that if the collision factor and the speeds aren't linked in there in a way, I'm kind of asking to myself, why would you put them in there? If they're not responsible for collisions involving pedestrians and cyclists. A lot of them are right-of-way violations, and you guys might have addressed some of that. And maybe you have looked at that, but I think it's absolutely critical that when you're presenting this or when you submit it for your grant, that you really lay out all of those pieces very carefully. Because I just think it gets makes a lot tighter presentation and package, and really makes it look like you guys really did the analysis of all of those. And don't underestimate the education component of kids in a condensed area like this. So just kind of some thoughts I had.
To follow up on those, from an education standpoint, the grant funding allows you to spend 10% of the grant funds, so up to $50,000 for a $500,000 grant on education components. So that's in our assumptions. We could probably call that out better in our report, but as part of the grant funding, we would like that education component for each of these area schools. Kind of the 4th E that really comes into place in the safer school plans as encouragement. So one of the main questions that was asked by a number of commissioners at the Transportation Council Commission in Menlo Park was, how do we know if all this worked? And how much of the grant funding would rely on? So we can certainly go out there later and do pedestrian and bicycle counts and do speed counts and look at collision data and see do people stop speeding or is it reduced? Are there less collisions? Are there more people biking and walking? It's going to be surprising for you to hear that although all those results are welcomed and are the goal of the program doesn't require you to monitor them. And so really the goal of the program is encouragement. That's the primary goal of the program, to encourage students and parents to walk and bike more to school. Where we try to put in the vehicle improvements is just to make the overall safety of the roadway increase, so that hopefully those collisions and speeding are reduced.
The thing is, Ed, just in sort of comment on your comments, is that if it's the cyclist's fault, many times, even if it's the cyclist's fault, the faster the car is going, the more serious the accident, the injury is likely to be.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's all I had this evening for a presentation.
I have a question. You're going to have your speed, you're recommending one of those, your light up speed sign near El Camino. Why wouldn't you recommend a similar sign at the west end of Valparaiso, where, as I remember, the speed was higher, wasn't it?
Just to the west of Cotton, I think.
Well, somewhere on the west end.
The difficulty at that location was placement on going westbound on Valparaiso as you're west of Elena. The homes and the right-of-way is narrower, and so placement of this apparatus, just because it's a little bit larger than, say, just a regular sign apparatus, we're having a difficulty in locating that, where we would be able to put it.
Because I remember, wasn't it almost 40 miles an hour up there?
And those are due, I think, by the city of Menlo Park, but I know in cooperation with the town of Atherton, Valparaiso speed surveys are due in the next year or two to be updated, and new surveys.
One of the other things, just a thought, I know when it took a long time to get the Hoover crosswalk in. My recollection is almost a couple of years. And one of the things that caused it to take a long time is they had to do extensive traffic studies in order to get that crosswalk in.
Are there any other comments? If none, I would like to thank you very much for a very, very interesting presentation, and you've certainly stimulated a lot of discussion, and so really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for thinking about the safety.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is this discussion, or follow-up here, the establishment of speed limits on Walsh Road, Alejandro Drive, Fair Oaks Lane, and James Avenue. Mike?
Yes, members of the committee. This is for information, and we have a similar report with a resolution that will be going to the City Council for approval at their September 19th meeting. Wanted to point out that we did do these speed studies at 4 locations on 4 streets. All 4 streets have existing speed limits. The reason why these studies were done is that the California Vehicle Code requires that in order to enforce speeds using radar, you need to have these speed surveys done on a periodic basis, and the basis is every 5 years. So that's the reason why staff did this, because the current speed surveys were close to expiring. In fact, in one location, it has expired. So what we found, and this report presents what the 85th percentile speed was, and what that is that it's a speed that, of all the cars that were measured, the speed that 85% of those cars were going at or below. And that's the criteria that the CVC outlines that you must use in order to set the speed limit. And what the rule is that the speed limit is the closest 5 mile per hour increment to that 85th percentile speed, measured speed. However, due to demographics, if there's a lot of driveways, poor visibility, those type of roadway conditions, the jurisdiction is allowed to reduce that speed by another 5 miles per hour. And that is what we're going to be recommending to council in all these instances. So, as the report says, the recommended speed limit for Walsh Road will be 30 miles per hour, Alejandra 25 miles per hour, Fair Oaks Lane 25 miles per hour, and James Avenue 25 miles per hour, and which also is the current posted speed limits on all those streets. Any questions?
Any questions?
Just a quick one, just from my inexperience. With round, you got 32 miles an hour for a couple of these. You round that down to 30, and then you say because of circumstance, we'll take it down another 5 miles an hour. So
That's
another 25.
That's correct.
How precise is this 32? If it was 32.6, for example, you wouldn't be able to round it down, presumably, right?
Well, it's just to the nearest mile per hour, and it's again based on a person physically going out there taking radar speed measurements. What the requirement is, you either do it for 1 hour or 100 vehicles. In this case, in all 4 locations, we have well over 200 speeds or data points. So, we just round it to the nearest mile per hour as opposed to fractionals.
Okay. Other questions? We'll go on to the next item, 6.4. Mike, you're up again.
Okay. This item is related to complete streets. Let me just pull up something real quick. The state of California recently had an initiative to promote a more comprehensive, integrated approach to the planning and construction of streets to provide for the safe and convenient travel for all travel modes, to include pedestrians, bikes, persons with disabilities, and public transportation operators. This initiative is most relevant to transportation facilities associated with new development, as well as expanding or improving the existing roadway system. And so the reason why I point that out is for the town of Atherton, the complete doesn't have as much relevance, say, if other communities like Menlo Park, Palo Alto, because there is no development here in the town of Atherton. And in the town of Atherton, we don't have major roadway expansions, new freeway interchanges, those type of projects. The reason why complete streets and adopting for communities to adopt resolutions regarding streets, complete streets, is that it is now a requirement that cities and counties must do this in order to be eligible for state and federal funding. And so that's an important part of this as well. So what's included in your packet is the actual resolution that we will be presenting to the City Council at the October meeting. And so the purpose of this evening is to get any comments or questions from the committee members. And again, once after the conclusion tonight, then this item will be prepared for City Council review and approval at the October meeting.
Mike, I have a lot of concern about this plan. Atherton prides itself on maintaining a rural community atmosphere. And should we be redeveloping a street, repaving a street, it would seem that we would be obligated to put in sidewalks, bicycle lanes, and ramps to accommodate the walkers, the bicyclists, the disabled, and I don't think that our community is open to that. That it's so very different from the way our community has been developed, as well as requiring additional land from our homeowners. Many people who have built out onto the easements and the right of ways are really going to object strongly to losing them.
Correct, and by adopting this resolution, this is not going to require. This does not, equate to a mandate that, you know, whenever you do any type of improvements, you need to put in curb gutter, sidewalk, and really, and you know, what you're talking about is really urbanizing streets. You know, that's not the reason, and that's why, you know, pointed out that the Complete Streets initiative has less relevance for the town of Atherton than other communities, because we aren't going to be putting in curb gutter and sidewalks. We aren't going to be widening streets. You know, we're not going to be approving new developments that's going to require new streets. But one of the things that we are going to do, and where the town of Atherton can integrate, you know, the philosophy and requirements of Complete Streets, is through the town's bicycle and pedestrian master plan, which the council approved as part of the capital improvement 5-year capital improvement program for this year. And you know, one of the things we also did was we actually, you know, had this same discussion with representatives from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, who is kind of the overseer of this in this area. And we met with them and explained the situation with Atherton, and that, you know, it is quite different than, you know, than all the other communities. And we also asked them to review our staff report and review the resolution to make sure that we are going to be in compliance with, you know, with the philosophy and what they're trying to achieve. And they did get back to us. After review, they said that what we're proposing here is fine. So even though the resolution, which is something that was provided by the MTC, and a lot of the requirements are required, as far as a resolution, it's not going to, you know, mandate. You know, the city council is still going to have the ability to set policy and to determine, you know, what improvements are or aren't going to be placed on the city streets.
You know, Mike, I share your concern, because it's one thing for them to say that they're not concerned and the way we do things is satisfactory to them, but it sort of reminds me of the housing element and what we got ourselves into. I realize that there's a big difference between ignoring a number, as they did prior to 2000, and getting ourselves into hot water because we didn't appeal it, and speaking with them, and they're giving us a verbal okay. But this policy in number 4 says that we shall be incorporated into reconstruction, and we do reconstruct our streets, maintenance, repair of streets. And then it says, except that specific infrastructure for a given category of users may be excluded. Now, for example, we have homes where there isn't a pathway, where there isn't a bicycle lane, where there are planting strips that go right out to the roadway. And it says, may be excluded if an exemption is provided as set forth in section C1. So if you're doing a roadway, this seems to indicate maintenance, reconstruction, or repair of a roadway, you would need an exemption as provided in C1 in accordance with this Federal Highway Administration provision. Now, they may say that we're okay, but that isn't what this policy says. It isn't what it says, and it's very nice that they say we're okay, but at some point you can't help but wonder. It's kind of like every time we go for the housing element, you know, one time it's you're okay, and that's fine, and the next time it's all you have to do is show that you have the capability, and the next time it's no, it's more than you have to show you have the capability. You actually have to show that you could build it, and the next time it's you have to actually show that they're there and you could build it and it's in your zoning code. And then the next time it's you could lose your gas tax money if you don't actually show you have the number. You know, and the next time it's, you know, every time it's getting harder and harder and harder for us to meet the obligation. And
Mike,
so
what happens
at what point are they going to say, no, this is what you have to do and this is what your resolution says, and And it may be all well and good that we gave you a verbal approval, but you passed a resolution saying you're going to live by this, and you can read, and your attorney could read, and you agreed to this.
Right. Well,
What happens if we don't pass this, Mike?
Could
Well-
you answer my question, Jim?
Oh, sorry.
well, actually, my answer was what I was going to say is actually going to address Jim's question. I believe is that the impact of not doing it, because again, as far as what gets constructed or not constructed in the town of Atherton, that's a policy decision by the council. No one is ever going to take that away from you. The impact of in the future, if they don't agree that the town is in compliance with the spirit and the letter of this, then at this point, then to me what they're going to do is they're going to say you're no longer eligible for federal transportation funds. And in fact, that's what they're saying now, is that by not, they're telling this to all the cities, by not adopting you either need to update your general plan, which is going to take a long time, or adopt this resolution. But if you don't do it by January of 2013, then you're not eligible for any federal funding. Now, what that means to the town of Atherton, I can't crystal ball and tell you what it's going to mean, in the future. But what I can tell you is over the next 2 years, what it means is about $280,000 of federal funding that the town of Atherton will be getting as a result of a formula-based allocation that is historically, distributed here in San Mateo County. So by not adopting a resolution, if the council decides to do that, then really all that means is that we're not going to be eligible to claim that money. So that's the impact. Again, and even by adopting it, and then at some future date they say, well, no, you just reconstructed that street and you should have done this, this, and that. Well, again, that's up to the town of Atherton. If that were to occur in the future, then to me the impact is then going forward, you're not going to, the town is not going to be eligible for federal funding, which is clearly a choice that the town can make if they have concerns about this policy.
Well, $200,000 will buy us about. Didn't that come out to about? What was it? 200 linear feet of sidewalk. From the other presentation, wasn't it $10 a linear foot? Is what he put up there?
That's approximately correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a fair amount of slurry seal, though.
Yes. Well,
and
I mean,
the other thing that disturbs me is that if we don't intend to do this, then we all stand up and say, yeah, we're a bunch of liars. We adopted this policy, we had no intention of implementing it, and I don't really want to sign up for that.
well, and again, I think it's about where, each community is different. And so, by adopting a policy like this doesn't mean everyone's going to become uniform. And so, again, to me, where the town of Atherton has the opportunity to because again, what this is about is for communities as they're planning future roadway expansions or new roadways, is to make sure that they're thoughtfully considering not only the car, but the person on the bike, the pedestrian walking, the disabled community, public transit operators. And so, we clearly can do that as part of our bike and pedestrian master plan. Where, as a result of that, I think, the goal would be that the town will identify opportunities without building new sidewalks, but perhaps, creating other types of paths along the roadway that where it's going to be delineated better and it's going to provide a safer environment for people to walk instead of just walking on gravel on the side of the road. So that's the purpose.
I guess what we do is we use our best efforts to look at alternative forms of mobility throughout the town, like what we did with Facebook, and said that we want to use that lump sum to look at all kinds of bicycle paths and pedestrian paths throughout the town. And while we may not be looking at disabled people's paths throughout the town, and we may not be looking at every single block, including all the cul-de-sacs, you use your best efforts to implement alternative means of transport throughout the town. And I think probably what you're going to end up with is I would imagine just about every town in California is going to have a problem with implementing this to the letter of this resolution, unless it's a totally new town that's being built. And even then, I'm not sure they could do it. So, I don't know. I can see the point. I stand by raising the question and your concern, but I don't think it's one that we have to. If it's a question of losing the money, I think we're okay in going forward and using best efforts.
So, Mike, if we adopt this, and we don't, and the council decides not to make any changes, then it seems to me that if we apply for a grant, they have to come back to us and say, you didn't do A, B, C, and D, and F, therefore you're not going to get it, which I think is kind of unlikely, isn't it?
Well, my belief is that by not adopting it, then don't even waste your time applying for grants with federal dollars
But
involved.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we adopt it,
Uh-huh.
and then the council, as you say, has all the decisions, so they decide they're not going to make any big changes to what they're already doing, and then we apply for a grant, and how do they turn down a grant? Do they have to come here and prove that we didn't do some of the things in this?
Well, you know what, and thinking about transportation grants, because that's what this is about. Typically, and the reason why the town of Atherton hasn't received a whole bunch, and is because you really don't have projects to qualify. You're not, building new interchanges. You're not doing things that increases capacity of the roadway by policy and by design. Typically, that's where, when you take a look at the folks who are getting grants, that's where it's going towards, because a lot of these grants is to relieve congestion. Where I believe, and to me, for the town, where the importance of actually creating and adopting a bicycle and ped master plan is now you have a plan to work, because there are grant opportunities for bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and so the town, which is probably the most likely ones that the town of Atherton will be going after, because again, you're not interested in building new curb and gutter sidewalks, you're not interested in widening roadways, and so forth. So to me, the types of grants that in all likelihood the town would be pursuing, which would be bicycle, pedestrian improvements, connectivity, it's going to be very much in line with
I just
with
don't
what
want
this
to
is
give up.
asking
I
for.
mean, it may not be that much money, but with our financial situation, I wouldn't want to give up $250,000, $300,000 in transportation funding.
But our general plan is due to be updated, I think. I think we're overdue for an update of our general plan.
I don't know about that. Yeah.
Ask Neil, but I think it's,
Okay.
it's close or we're overdue. So it's something that I think, even in view of what we've done with Facebook, we would want to look at pedestrian and bicycle paths, because we've already obligated ourselves to do so. And the other thing, which we probably would want to do, is look at roundabouts, because that's something we've discussed, the potential for roundabouts in town. And that is one, the vehicular potential for grants that we might want to include in our general plan, the possibility of including those at various locations in town to relieve traffic congestion.
Well, how does everybody else feel? I mean, my feeling is at the moment, I would take the chance of adopting it and then not doing anything that the council doesn't want to do.
I would say I would recommend adopting it, and that the council proceed with in due time with the amendment of the general plan to take into consideration bicycle paths, pedestrian paths, and roundabouts, which we have the potential viability of roundabouts to relieve traffic congestion in Atherton, which is something which we have considered. It may not be viable, but it should be considered.
So, do any of our other members here have a comment?
I've done a lot of transportation grant work, and both for the feds and for the state and for MTC. In my experience, if we don't have this, we're going to really be in trouble with trying to get grants. if we do have this, we can apply for grants and we address these issues in the grant application of what we're going to do for pedestrians. When we can't do something for disabled people, we say we can't. We just, it's not in the cards. And then they hopefully give us the grant. In my experience, they never come around to see, did you comply
That's my
with
feeling
all
too.
of that
That's exactly
stuff.
my feeling.
They give you the grant and you write reports and everybody's
Exactly
happy.
the
Is
way.
that your experience, Mike? I mean, that's what I've seen.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're in the business of taking state and federal dollars and do grants, distribute it to local agencies to build improvements. They're not in the business of they're not like the stormwater folks who are in the business of going back and really regulating to make sure that certain things are being done.
Yeah, I don't mean that we should be insincere in doing
No,
this,
but
the fact is they don't come back and beat you up because it turned out you couldn't provide handicap ramps or something like that. So,
Should we take a vote on this one?
Can I just so I understand the process? Did we draft this language? You said you got this approval. Where
No.
did this language come from?
This language was provided by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and they're providing it to all the agencies which they within their jurisdiction, which is pretty much San Mateo, Santa Clara, Alameda, and I think San Francisco, and possibly Marin counties. So
basically, it's given to you, and you can.
yes, we did tweak it. You know, we did. I can't. Neil Martin, our planner, is the one who actually went through, and I do know that he made some edits, and that's why we wanted to make sure that the MTC representative reviewed it to make sure it would still, meet with their approval.
Okay.
But we didn't tweak it very much. It's pretty much, it's 90% what they gave us.
I would move
Go ahead.
that we recommend to the council that they accept and approve this resolution.
Okay.
Yep.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
One opposed. Okay. All right, next item. I think this one is Ed, your show.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Motor Officer Tim Marks. He's filling in for Anthony, Sergeant Anthony Copeland, who's at the Supervisor Leadership Institute town on training. What you'll find is 3 months worth, because we missed a month of statistics. And I really wanted to ask the group if you find some of the real detailed analysis, like traffic collision statistics, time of day, day of week, and the incident search results, which lays it out by street. If you find that helpful, or would you like that on an on-call basis rather than us printing that? It's something that the police department's been doing for years. So, and I don't know that anybody's ever asked if that's helpful.
I don't find it too helpful.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't find it helpful unless I have some need that I'm looking at. I think the narrative, a good overview of the citation issue, the traffic complaints, the traffic collisions,
that's the thing I read.
special assignments, that report.
Well,
That's what I like.
I was going to ask too, is all of this information in some sort of a computer database?
Absolutely. Yeah, we feed that into a CAD, and we can manipulate it.
So what would be a lot more useful for me would be to have maps showing the number of accidents, for example, at given intersections versus time.
Yeah, that's very doable. We can do that.
Yeah, if you can prevent it in a graphical means, then we can absorb it much more quickly and try to spot. It's very hard to spot the real vulnerabilities when it's just presented in this tabular form.
One thing I kind of feel is that we've kind of reached a plateau on citations and tickets and everything else. I mean, we go up and down a little bit, but we seem to have kind of hit the top. Is that your feeling? They're not increasing that much.
You know, well, you know, there's a kind of a finite.
Well, I realize that. I'm just wondering if that's your
I'm getting a
opinion.
good feel for some consistent education, enforcement, and work around the schools. So it's not just about writing tickets or writing warning tickets. Obviously, we look at our traffic index, which is a relationship to the number of moving violations, hazardous moving violations to collisions. However, we don't have a lot of collisions, so that, you know, that's not always a good, I guess, evaluation of what traffic safety is doing for us in the town of Atherton. But I believe Councilmember McKeithen said that traffic, in particular speed, is one of the major concerns of the police department, which is why we focus on that.
Well, no, I think there is. I'm just saying, are we going to be, next year we will be able to double the tickets, or are we, I'm trying to, it looks to me like we've kind of reached a plateau. Maybe that's all we can do. I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying.
Well, bear in mind that we have just added 2 new officers. We have a vacancy. Those new officers have been trained. So they're behind the power curve, you know, the training curve, and the field training officer that's working with them is also limited. So it's I guess it's a double factor with respect to lost productivity when we're in that training mode, because that training has to occur by post. Peace officers, standards of training commission, or post commission. So, yeah, I think there's going to be
a plateau.
Yeah, when we fill the positions and we get everybody at rank. And then Tim Marks, who's also been doubling as a training officer and filling in for some vacancy, hasn't been working traffic as a lot. He's a ticket writing machine when he's out there. We still have the other the other motor officer. And we have some interviews going on now. We hope to get that second motor officer, which is what we usually have. So I don't know that we've reached that plateau.
Okay, well, I just
have a way to go.
And I also,
my philosophy of what I tell the officers is that it's not about writing tickets, it's about traffic safety.
Yeah.
It's about gaining voluntary compliance. It's never about raising revenue.
Yeah.
It's about educating the public, and some enforcement is absolutely necessary. It has to happen. So that's kind of our standard. So we focus on engineering, working with Mike and the folks that were in here, enforcement and education. So it's the 3 components are absolutely critical to traffic safety.
Does it actually ever produce any revenue?
I don't think
by the
it's a
time
lot.
you
By
go
the
to
time
court,
everybody gets a piece of that.
Yeah,
we
I don't
only
think
get
so.
some like 15% of the traffic.
No, I don't think it ever does.
It's not a great deal.
No.
But just to be clear, that everybody's clear that that's not a factor that we use
I don't
in
even-
any way, shape, or form,
I can't
right?
even tell you what the bail schedule is.
Yeah, 'cause that's a real issue. That's a
We
real
don't
issue.
get- we get-
People
Right,
don't
to get revenue.
understand it doesn't produce revenue.
I seem to remember that we get something like
Not here.
15% of the tickets or something. It's not much.
Yeah.
So I have one other question.
Yeah, in the police department, we never discussed that. We talked about this whole traffic enforcement in terms of traffic safety and creating a better quality of life for our neighbors.
I have one more question. On unlicensed drivers, I noticed that we've seem to be picking up quite a lot of unlicensed drivers. Now, if we pick up an unlicensed driver once, I guess we can't tow his car nowadays. If we pick him up again, the same person, what's the situation?
I'm going to let the experts speak to that, because that's been a while since I've been in a radio car writing tickets. But
there's the community care doctrine, which allows us to tow vehicles if they're in parks, like in a parking zone, or parking traffic, or parked on private property that's not their own. But recently there's been law enforcement's been under fire from various groups saying that we're targeting specific ethnic people with ethnic backgrounds because of that's generally who are unlicensed. And so a lot of agencies have chosen not to tow out of fear that they're going to get some kind of lawsuit based on some kind of, basically discriminating against this particular minority. And so, but the community care doctrine allows us
in other words, it's the same person that we just ticketed yesterday and we catch him again today. Can we tow his car?
It all depends. Some, like I said, it's parked in an area where it can be legally parked and left safe. We tend to just leave the vehicle there and have a licensed driver pick it up. But historically, these cars that these licensed drivers are driving, they're basically throwaway cars anyways. They don't put a lot of money in them. So you tow their car, they said, okay, fine, and then they just provide another car. Until there's some kind of legislation basically saying whether you can't purchase a car without a license, it's not going to change. They're just going to have multiple cars in the production anyways. I've stopped numerous people and they'll be driving different cars, but for the most part they still will drive the car they were initially stopped. It's just the nature of the beast.
Are there any penalties against the driver? I mean, you can't throw him in jail, or
a licensed driver, it is a misdemeanor. San Mateo County right now, because we have so many in San Mateo County, a lot of the times the courts will reduce it to an infraction, but it is technically a misdemeanor. And by misdemeanor, they can serve some county jail time in a fine, but I get to see them if they're in jail time for being unlicensed.
Any other comments?
Yeah, on the August of 212, the speed warnings and citations, I see that written warnings are almost doubling the citation issue, and that's rising again. I mean, if the officer goes to all the trouble of obviously somebody's speeding, it's under the speed heading, and there's 76 written warnings for speeding and 44 citations for speeding, I think it should be reversed at least 76 citations and 44 warnings, because these kind of people, when they get the warnings, oh great, I didn't get a ticket. That doesn't mean they're going to slow down.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, as a chief explained, we are in a training mode. We have two officers who are currently in the process of being trained. A lot of the time with training, we're just trying to get them used to making contact with the driver, get used to the rapport, get used to using cover. There's a lot of the safety aspects that we're concentrating on. Additionally, when riding for speed, they have to have certain criteria, they have to have certain post-training, which they don't possess yet. And so for them to write a solid radar citation, they have to have that training, and they don't have it yet. So there's a lot more warning signs right now until they get that certification. So I can guarantee you the next week when I go back on the motorcycle, you'll see those numbers go back up.
John, I actually agree with you, and I prefer to be close to 50-50, but I think some of the things that Officer Marks is referring to is probably has some bearing on it. And but I also give the officers, and the law gives them a wide range of discretion, and I never want them to push a bad situation or a right ticket, because if they're not sure, I'd rather have them get the warning.
But as the people on the committee here that for 3 or 4 or 5 years, Mr. Jim and Kathy, we know the days, lucky you're here, the days you weren't here, we were getting 20, 30 speeding tickets a month for the whole department.
I know.
That's spread over 20 plus officers.
We calculated that each
For years,
officer gave a ticket once every 2 days.
Yeah.
At that time.
And we've talked to other chiefs, and you've always been, you're the one that's cooperative, doing well, in my
Do you
opinion.
remember what the philosophy was about giving tickets?
Yeah, you tell them.
I've already told them. Do you remember?
We didn't want people coming in complaining.
Yeah, but how he had to be, how high he had to be over the speed limit?
No.
We don't want to bring that up.
Okay. But you remember, don't you?
Oh, I remember
You know,
exactly.
there's several streets.
It was a lot.
I don't want to make it
Well, they used to
public.
tell us when they give a ticket how many miles over. Jim remembers. They used to tell us.
But these cut-through streets going east and west all day long, Atherton Avenue, Almond Draw, even Tuscaloosa a little bit, Stockbridge.
Remember
Selby.
Park? How many complaints we used to
Yeah.
get on Park about construction vehicles?
Yeah. But in 10 minutes you can spot them. You know, they're not even going 35. They're going much faster. The Maserati and Ferrari dealer, as we know, used to test them going up and down Stockbridge at 75 miles an hour when they were tuning them up and come back and around and test them. And the officers stopped that. But yeah, that's true. The dealer on El Camino.
I do think over the year plus I've been here that it seems like we're having fewer complaints about traffic than we had when I first arrived on the scene. So that could be a good sign.
I think you've had praise for the first time ever. I mean, I know that when you came on, there were months when people were saying, you know I saw it where we'd actually see day after day police writing tickets. We never saw that before, ever.
Right. It
Right?
used to be that people said, don't worry about speeding in Atherton because you'll never get a ticket. That really was. And I think that we've changed that a little bit. I appreciate
The
that.
word gets out. I think the surrounding communities will realize that Atherton Police Department is serious about traffic safety and speed in our community. And if they're going to cut through our community, they're driving the speed limit, they're liable to get pulled over.
I think James Avenue, which is where I live, I think it's better than it was. We occasionally get the odd driver doing 70 miles an hour. Not often, but just occasionally I hear that roar, and of course he's gone before I can get his license plate. But
Must be one of those
I think it's better. I think it's better than it was. I think it's been improved.
There was all the construction going on. You can see the speeders basically aren't residents or in sedans and so on. They're these pickups, construction workers, gardeners, repair people. Every other car is some of that. I mean, in fact, there's more of those people breaking the law than anyone.
Yes, construction is a lot of it.
Construction, repairs, gardeners.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult situation, but I think it's better. That's my.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is.
So, okay, are we finished with this one? So let's get to Mike again. Do you want to comment on the updates?
No, I don't have anything in addition to what we have.
Any other comments on the rest of the agenda here?
No.
Well, in that case, next meeting is November the 13th, and I will now ask for a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. How was it?
Mike, we're very glad to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
A lot of people said it was
Sorry, I arrived a little late. Yeah.
Did you have a link?
about 8 times. It was a perfect size.
Right.
Weather was magnificent. Everything.
I think I told you at this stage, I'm almost qualified to be a wedding consultant.
I'll tell you, that was the one thing I didn't like was our wedding consultant. They were really,
I see a lot of weed signs.
Yeah. Okay. I was curious because I mean.
Well, no, they're looked up online. I saw them.
these,
Yeah.
wedding consultants, I think,
Gotcha.
are like the funeral business. They work nickel and dime you to death. They charge for 15 tables, there were 11. They charge $80 a flower arrangement. I swear, they looked like $25. They took them apart and threw away the flowers, which were ours. They took the containers. And I thought, those are ours, we paid for them. They were loading up the car and had it almost all loaded before.
I'm sorry, the guy who wants to say hello.
Oh, hi. Thank you. I'm glad you're here.
I'll see you.
They had us pay for meals for the people at a jacked up price.
we had to pay for meals that were for vegetarians, but they never put it on the menu. So we paid for the meals, but they never put it on the menu. They had coffee and tea upon the request, but they never put it on the menu. And they had us pay for all coffee cups and saucers, a couple $100, but they never put it on the menu. They had us. They specifically said that they didn't want to leave the dinners at the extra meats and salmons and stuff at the table. They would come around and serve. They never served it. About an hour into the meal, I said, "Why aren't they serving it again?" And they said, "Oh, we'll have to ask about that." And when they did, they said, "Oh," I said, "Where's the bread? They were supposed to be reserving bread. Oh, it's all gone. Where is it? You never served it again."
After I became an expert for the third one.
The bread, they cut the rolls in half. I said, "I've never seen rolls cut in half."
Youngest I was buying, which was right here.
It's grand theft.
They said X number of people here, so many hours. So this time I'm smart.
Oh, I learned a whole bunch of things.
Count when they arrive, count how many people were, and so on the bill I said, and then so when she came to get the bill I said, "I'm not paying this." And they go, "Really?" I said, "I'm not paying this. Here's what happened. Bing, 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 bing. And we had a well-known caterer. Somebody, got a big reputation. She got so upset. She said, "Oh, and they don't want to eat